During these dark times, there is a mass pandemic facing the world's population. A disease has spread across the globe and is silently infecting millions and millions of people. This disease is no joking matter. It has destroyed the lives of many and has single-handedly crippled nations' economies. This disease that I speak of is sobriety. Every single day, millions of Americans will suffer at the hands of this fatal disease. The death is not a painless one either. Instead, the parasite that is sobriety will latch onto its host and slowly suck the life out of it until its will to live withers away. No one is immune to this deadly disease. Your friends, your loved ones, your nana, even your dog could already be infected. That's right, even Fluffy could be suffering from debilitating sobriety. The symptoms for sobriety can be subtle at times, but the signs will clearly be there. Be on the lookout for anyone who was once very fun to be around, but all of a sudden became insufferably boring. Another common sign includes a lack of desire to binge on Taco Bell at 3 in the morning. This disease is not something we can fight alone. We must support each other and our community. We must bring awareness to the grave dangers of sobriety and ensure that everyone is properly equipped to fight it. That is why I started the Fight Sobriety initiative. Every dollar you donate to the Fight Sobriety cause will help fund my fight against this crippling disease. Your donations will cover medical costs as well as vaccinations. 1 hourly shot of tequila is all that is needed to gain immunity. A small sum of $1 million is all I need to ensure my liver has a healthy dose of Jack Daniels till the day I die. We must not live in fear anymore. We must embrace unity as it is mankind's greatest strength. We will fight sobriety till the end and we will come out victorious, no matter how many beers it takes. Alright guys, it is time for you to step up and donate to this valiant and noble cause. Head on over to fightsobriety.com and help me reach my goal of raising $1 million to end sobriety once and for all. And I promise you, all proceeds will go to funding my alcohol addiction. There will be tons of vodka, there'll be tons of whiskey, there'll be tons of scotch, there'll be tons of bourbon, and I promise you, I will have alcohol flooded into my body 24/7. Now, on this website, I have also included a small backstory on why I created this charity. I've also included links to my social media accounts in case you ever need to get in touch. I know a lot of us go through tough times, and if you're ever worried about potentially relapsing into a life of sobriety, or you just need a helping hand for something, feel free to reach out to me, and I'll try to offer as much help as I can. Maybe provide a little motivation to make sure that you guys stay on track. The last thing we need is another person falling back into a boring, depressing life of being sober. Now, to the right of the website, I set up a progress bar to track how much money I've raised to reach my $1 million goal to end sobriety once and for all. And you may have noticed I've only raised about $33, which I know is not a lot, but I suspect that's going to change very soon because I know when people hear my story, they will come out in droves and donate as much money as possible because I know deep down inside, all people are kind and generous human beings who want to help. And once they get to know what my cause stands for and what I stand for, I know that they will be more than happy to donate to this ever so important cause. And for everyone that's watching, I hope that you guys can spare a few dollars for this ever so important cause that I've set up. And if you can, go ahead and hit that beautiful blue button right here to support me, and you'll see this modal pop up. And so here, this is where you can specify how much money you want to donate to this cause. So if you're going to donate, I don't want you to settle for just 1 0 or maybe 2 zeros. I recommend you slap on maybe at least 3 zeros, but if you want to go 4 or 5, by all means, you're only helping this planet. Once you specify how many dollars you want to donate, put in your credit card information, and don't worry, this is 100% secure. This is all set up by Stripe.js. So put in your credit card information, put in that expiration date, the CVC, which no idea what that actually does, and then your zip code, and then go ahead and hit the Pay Now button. And if it's successful, we should ideally see a green check mark. And if you take a look at our progress bar, you can see that we now have raised $5,033. So we are a little bit closer to ultimately reaching that $1 million goal. Ultimately, if we are able to reach the $1 million goal, I promise you, I will dedicate the next 3 hours of this video teaching you guys how you can build your very own website so that you can join this noble cause and start raising money to help fight sobriety as well. And we're going to learn a ton of different things. We're going to build a full stack application with React on the front end and Node Express on the back end. And to accept credit card payments, we're actually going to use the Stripe.js library so that we can process credit cards. And just because I felt super nice, we're also going to make this website mobile responsive. So if you want to help fight sobriety on your mobile phone while you're sitting on the toilet, you will be able to do that on a beautiful, sexy website that I built out. So let's open this up in Chrome Developer Tools just to show you that mobile responsiveness. And I'm going to change this to be mobile view. And let me minimize this for a second. And if we take a look, we've got our website on our computer view. And then if we keep shrinking it, you'll see that things shrink. And we're going to be using CSS Grid to do that. And then eventually, if it gets small enough, boom, breakpoint hits. And now we've got everything set up vertically. And so let's go ahead and get started on building this website. The first thing that we have to do is we have to create an account at Stripe so that we can start processing payments. Hey guys, just a quick note. I know a lot of you guys watching aren't really interested in doing the Fight Sobriety project, and you just want to see how to accept payments with Stripe as quickly as possible. And so what I've done is I've broken this video up into two different sections. The first section, I'm going to show you how to actually accept payments with Stripe. And we're not even going to touch the Fight Sobriety project at all. It's just the bare minimum you need to accept payments. And I'm going to show you guys how to do this using the pre-built checkout page, as well as the custom payment flow, so that you can decide on your own which one you prefer, and you'll have a good start on how to actually do that. And then only once we have a basic understanding of Stripe, we'll then go on to build out the Fight Sobriety project. And the reason I did that is that, if you're only interested in learning how to do Stripe integration into your React and Express application, you just have to watch the first section, and then you can, close the video. And then for anyone else that wants to actually do the project, then they can just follow along with the rest of the video. So let's go ahead and create our Stripe account. So we want to go to stripe.com and we'll click the sign in button. And then here we want to sign up instead of sign in. And then go ahead and just put your information in. All right. And so once you get logged in, it's going to take you into your dashboard. And at this point, the only two things that you should really care about is getting your test API keys. And so the thing about Stripe is that they have test API keys for when you're actively developing on your project. And then they also have your final production keys or your live API keys, which are locked at the moment. So we actually have to verify our account and do a few other things before we actually can go live with the project and use the production keys. But for most of the projects, we're going to be using this. And then I'm not sure if I'm going to walk you through actually deploying it into production because that would take a little bit more time. But really, the only thing that matters is you have a publishable key and a secret key. The secret key is the one that you don't want anyone to see, obviously, because you can't see it right now. The publishable key, that'll be on the front end. And so, anyone will technically have access to it. That's no big deal. The secret key is the one you want to be careful with. When you go live, you'll get a new set of publishable and secret keys that you'll just swap out with. So you could just set them as environment variables. And so that way, when you're in production, it uses the live API keys. And when you're in development, it'll use the publishable, it'll use the test API keys. But we can just click this. I'm not too worried about you guys actually seeing it because I'll just, change these later on or just close this account. But keep this in mind. So this is the only two things that you need for the dashboard from now. But we've got our account set in Stripe. So in the next section, we can start taking a look at actually accepting payments using Stripe. All right, so now that we have our Stripe account set up, let's go to the Stripe documentation. You can get there by going to stripe.com/docs/payments. And here we want to select accepting a payment. And there's two things I want to point out. So Stripe does have excellent documentation, but there's two ways you can actually view their documentation. So you can view this in an interactive type tutorial like we see here, or you can view it as a text-based format where it's not quite as interactive, where you can kind of click things and get things highlighted. I recommend you open both of them. And the reason why I say that is for some reason, the code doesn't match between the two. So there's certain things that are left out in one of the formats versus the other. And I don't know why they decided to do that. You would think they would have the exact same code in it. So go ahead and open up both. And I recommend you following along on both of them because they both provide helpful information that isn't in the other one. Once again, not sure why they decided to go that route, but that's just the case. For the most part, though, the code's going to be relatively similar, though. But I'll make sure to point out all of the important things, and you'll see that setting this up is really, really simple. Now, the thing about Stripe is that there's two different methods for accepting a payment. We've got the pre-built checkout page, and we have the custom payment flow. Now, with the pre-built checkout page, what happens is basically the user clicks a button and it basically redirects them to a Stripe hosted page. And then Stripe kind of handles all of the logic of accepting the payment. And so this is the more simpler and easier and more convenient method because all the logic, the error handling, it's all handled by Stripe and it's abstracted away from you. So you don't have to do anything. You just have to put in the code to redirect them to that page. So this is the simple solution. However, it's obviously not as flexible because, once again, it's a page hosted by Stripe. So if you need, customization in the overall payment flow, then you're going to have to go to the custom payment flow route. It's a little bit more complex. You're going to have to do a lot of the error handling and managing the loading state and things like that. But it does give you more flexibility. In this tutorial, I'm going to make sure that we cover both. We're going to start out with the pre-built checkout page just because it's the simpler one, and then we'll move on to the custom payment flow. And when we go to actually work on the project or the website that I went over earlier, we're going to be using the custom payment flow just because it's the more challenging of the two. And I figured I might as well show you guys how to use that in an actual production type website. Now, before we proceed any further, I do want to point out one thing. If you're trying to build just a simple front-end React application or any front-end application without having a dedicated backend or a dedicated Express server, and you still want to accept Stripe payments, it's not going to work. You need to have a dedicated backend to assist with the overall payment processing. And the real reason we need to have the backend is so that we can protect our secret key. And so if you remember, if you take a look at your dashboard, we have two keys. We've got the publishable key and we've got the secret key. So the publishable key, it's okay if any of your users see it. They will actually see it. It's not a problem. However, the secret key is what we use to actually talk to the Stripe servers. And if the clients ever got access to it, then that would obviously be a major security vulnerability. And so if we set up our React front end to be able to talk directly to Stripe, we would have to host our secret keys on our React application. And at that point, it's very easy to actually see what that key is. And so by setting up a backend and keeping the secret key on the backend, we're able to protect that key so that users don't have access to it. And that's why we ultimately need to have that Express backend so that it kind of acts as that middleman, so that React will send an API request to the Express server, and then the Express server can then talk to the Stripe servers. And so that's how we make it a little bit more secure. It's all about security. And especially when it comes to handling money and payments, we want to make sure that we're really as secure as possible. And so that's just something to keep in mind. Unfortunately, we can't just have a front end that talks directly to Stripe. Now, let's go ahead and create a directory for our project. I'm going to call it Stripe project, and we'll move into that folder. And we're going to create two extra directories within here. We'll make one for the front end, which I'll call client, and then one for the back end, which I'll call server. And at this point, we can open up this directory in our text editor of choice. And what we're going to do is we're going to focus on the back end first. So I'm going to open up the terminal, and there's going to be a couple of things that we need to do. So let's move into the server folder, and we need to set up npm. So we'll do npm init -y. And then after that, we need to install a few different packages. So we'll do npm install. The first thing we need is Express. We'll also need the Stripe package as well as cores. And then finally, we'll also do .env so that we can import environment variables. And so now that we've got that set up, let's create a new file within our server directory. We'll call this server.js. And within here, the first thing we'll do is we'll set up Express. And then we want to create our Express instance. And we'll also set up cores. So up to this point, we haven't done anything specific to Stripe. At this point, now we need to set up our secret key. So we'll do const Stripe equals require Stripe. And then here we'll do another parentheses, and this is where you want to put your secret key. So we have to go back to our dashboard, and I think I closed that out. So let me open that up again. And we'll start with our test API key. So grab your secret key. Just copy that, and we're just going to paste it in here. Right. So like I mentioned before, right, this is the main reason why we need to have a backend for our application, is that we don't want to ever share their secret key or put this on our front end, or then all of our customers and clients would technically be able to access it if they wanted to or tried to. All right. And so now we're going to set up one simple route. We're going to set up a route for a post request. So we'll do app.post. And we'll create this route and we'll call it create checkout dash session. You can technically call it whatever you want, right? This is your backend. This isn't specific to Stripe. But I'm going to follow along with what's in the tutorial. So if you take a look at the tutorials, they're going to be doing the same thing. I think if we go down to create checkout session, they also called it, well, they just called it create session, but you can call it whatever you want. And so just like any other route handler, we accept a request and a response. And this isn't going to be an asynchronous request. So we have to add that. And now we have to create a Stripe checkout session. So we'll do const session equals await, and then Stripe dot checkout. So we're grabbing this from the Stripe checkout library. It's all included. We'll do Stripe dot checkout dot session dot create. And now we have to pass in a few properties. So the first one is going to be payment method. So we do payment underscore method underscore types. And so we have to list all the different payment methods that we want to support. So we're just going to do credit card. Stripe does have support for like Google and Apple Pay and things like that. And I think by default, they actually get included when you select card. I may be wrong, but we can double check when we actually test it out. Now, the next thing that we have to pass in is what's referred to as line items. So line items is basically going to be an array that's going to keep track of all of the items the customer is about to purchase. So we do line underscore items, take an array, and then we're going to pass in an object for each item the customer is purchasing. So in this example, I'm just going to do one item, but if you had, if the customer was purchasing 10 different items, then you'd put another one for item 2 and another one for item 3 and so on. You obviously wouldn't hard code it. You would, retrieve that information from the front end and then process it. But for this example, I'm just going to hard code one item just to show you guys how to do it. And so here's the thing. We got to pass in a price underscore data property. And this is going to be an object. So we'll do currency. Whoops. And we're going to accept USD. And then we have to include information about the specific product. And so this will be, the customer will see this when they go to the Stripe checkout page. So remember, this is a page hosted by Stripe. So we have to make sure we give it all of the details that it needs. We can give it a name property. So in this example, and the example they give, there's a t-shirt. So customer's buying a t-shirt. And you can also include images, right? So this takes a list. And for this, what I'm just going to do is I'm just going to go on the internet and just search for a picture of a t-shirt as an example. And so we will go to images. I'll just grab this t-shirt and copy image address. And we just paste it in here. And, images are technically optional. You don't need to include it, but, if the customer's going to be buying a product, it would be nice to show it to them when they actually go to the checkout page. All right. And then outside of product data, we can add the unit amount. So this is basically the price. Now, let's say we're trying to charge $20 for this t-shirt, right? Your instinct would be to put 20, but that's not actually how Stripe works. Instead, Stripe takes the lowest denomination of your currency. And so for United States dollar, that's going to be 1 cent. So the unit amount is going to be 1 cent. This is going to be different for every currency. So, I guess if you're in England or something and you're using pounds, I don't know what's smaller than a pound, but whatever your lowest denomination is, that's what unit amount is going to refer to. So to charge $20, that's going to be 2,000 cents. That's going to give us $20. And then finally, we have to give it the quantity. So how many are they purchasing? And we'll just say 1 in this case. The next thing we need to include is the mode. So what type of payment? And this is going to be basically you just pass in payment, but there's different options. So if a customer is going to be paying with like a recurring payment, so if you have like a subscription model, there's a few different options with Stripe. So you'd have to check the documentation. I think there's a link in here. So if we scroll down, let me see if I can find that. Payment methods. Here we go. No, it's not payment methods. We may have to go to the other documentation. Like I said, the interactive documentation has some things that the text-based documentation has, and the text-based documentation has some things that the interactive one doesn't have. The mode. So the mode, right? There's 3 modes: payment, subscription, or setup. If you want to take a look at how to set up subscriptions or a setup, then just take a look at those specific documentations for those. But we're going to just be using one-time payment, as most purchases are. And then the next thing that we need to do is we need to pass in a success URL and a cancel URL. And so, like I said, with the checkout page, right, the customer is going to a completely different website, right? They're going to the Stripe hosted website. So we need to tell Stripe what URL should we send them back after they finish their payment. And so we can send them to 2 different URLs. So there's a success URL. So if they successfully purchased an item, that means that the purchase went through and their credit card got charged. Then we can send them to the success URL. If the customer decided to not go through with the payment, or if for some reason the payment failed and they just closed it out, then we need to send them to the cancel URL. So we'll do success_URL. All right. And so, our front end is going to be running on localhost port 3000, like most applications, well, most React applications during development mode. But you'd obviously want to change this when you actually go to deploy to be your actual website's address. But since we're just, for demonstration purposes, I'm just going to do localhost :3000. And then cancel_URL. And then we'll do http://localhost:3000 as well. All right, so in this case, we're sending them to the same site because we have a single page app in React. But we do want to be able to give our front end some feedback on, did they successfully complete the payment or was it canceled, right? Because right now they'll just get redirected and our React application will have no idea if they were successful with their purchase or if they're canceled, or if someone is just navigating to the site the first time and they weren't actually redirected from the checkout page. And so what we can do is we can pass in success equals true in this case. And then for a failure, we can say success equals, not success. We can say canceled equals true. And so in that way, in our front end, we can look for these parameters in the URL to determine, if they were, first of all, redirected to this page from the checkout page. And secondly, if they were successfully able to purchase an item or if they canceled. All right. And so we'll get some information back from Stripe once this is completed. And you probably want to do a try catch block with any asynchronous code like this. So we'll do try catch. And we can just grab all of this and move it into the try block. And after we get our session, what we need to do is we need to send some information back to the front end. So the session will include an ID. And that's coming from Stripe. So basically, we create a checkout session, or when we send this request towards the Stripe API, the Stripe API will return a session ID once it creates it. So then we pass this session ID back to our front end. And so that's how the front end is essentially able to redirect the customer to the right checkout page. So we want to take session. So right after here, and we can do a res.json and then send the ID property to be session. And then we're going to grab the ID from the session, which is returned from the Stripe API. All right, and so that's all we have to do on our backend. All we have to do on the front end is basically send a post request to this URL, and we will return it the session ID. And then with that session ID, we can then redirect the customer. One thing to keep in mind right now, I don't have this stored in an environment variable. It would probably be best to create an environment variable, and that way when you go into production, it'll automatically update it with the live secret key. And then when you're in development, you can use the test secret keys. Make your life a little bit easier. But for now, we're just going to keep it simple. I'm just going to leave it like this. All right, so we finished the back end. Let's move on to the React front end. And I'm going to show you guys just how easy it is to integrate the Stripe Express checkout on the front end. So let's make sure that we have CD'd into the client directory on the right terminal, which is going to be for our front end. And I'm going to do an npx create react app dot. Now, once that's finished, there's a couple of libraries that we need to install. So if we go back to our documentation, you'll see that we need to install Stripe. So we have to, we need to install Stripe/Stripe-js. And because we're going to be making a post request to our backend, I'm also going to install Axios because I like using it. But you can use the fetch API if you'd like. I'm going to do npm install. And what was it? Just copy that. Paste it, and then we're also going to install Axios as well. Okay, so once that's done, let's go to our source directory. I'm going to minimize the server side, and I'm going to delete all of these. And I'm just going to create two files, an index.js, and I'm also going to make our app.jsx file. So I'm just going to use my little shorthand notation. If I do RAFCE, it's going to create a basic functional component with React. I'm going to save that and then go to index.js. I'm going to import React. I'm also going to import React Router DOM. And then we'll do React DOM.render. And then we have to import our app component. So I'm going to let VS Code do that for me. All right, so we've got the app component imported. And we're just going to say document.getElementById. And we're going to set that to root. All right, let's save that. And I'm just going to do a npm start. And I'll wait for that to finish loading up. And it looks like everything's good. I'm just going to do an inspect just to make sure that there's no errors. And it looks like everything's good to go. I'm going to make that a little bigger for you guys. All right, so since we're just going to build a simple demo application just so you can see how things work with Stripe, let's go back to the documentation, and you'll see that all we have to do is let's create a simple dummy button. Actually, before that, let's actually load up Stripe. So to get Stripe working, we have to import load Stripe from the Stripe.js library, and then we have to specify basically a variable that loads up Stripe, and we have to pass in our public key. And so if you don't remember where to get the public key, if you go back to your Stripe dashboard, you'll go to your test API keys, and then your public key is your publishable key. So this is the key that's okay to run on your front end. So if your clients get their hands on it, it's not a big deal. They're supposed to. So that's why it's called the publishable key. All right, so we will do a import load Stripe. And that's going to be from the Stripe/Stripe-js library. And then beneath that, we'll do a const Stripe promise, just like it was in the documentation, and then call that load Stripe method. And then here we want to paste in the publishable key. So I'm just going to, if you click on this, it's going to automatically copy it. And then just paste it in there. And that should be a string. And you probably want to load this as an environment variable so that you can switch between your test environment and your production environment, because when you do move to your production environment, you actually get basically your production keys. So these are just for testing. Stripe will give you a different set of keys when you actually deploy to production. But I'm just going to leave it like this for now. Once we got that loaded up, let's create our button. Set the role equal to link. And this is just going to say buy now. So this is just going to represent whatever button the customer or the user clicks on to actually start the checkout process in your application. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to set an on-click event handler. And this is just going to be called handle Stripe checkout. So this function is going to contain all the logic for handling the Stripe checkout process. And within our handle Stripe checkout, we want to grab a instance of Stripe.js. So we'll do const Stripe equals await. And then we're going to await this Stripe promise. All right, and make sure that this is within the function here and that the Stripe promise is actually outside of the component itself. All right, so now that we've got our instance of Stripe, what we need to do is we have to make a post request to our backend Express server. So if you recall, if we go back to our Express server, we have this specific route for /create checkout sessions. So this is going to require a post request. And when we make this post request, what's going to happen is that our backend is going to talk to the Express side. Sorry, our backend is going to talk to the Stripe servers to basically create a checkout session. So they'll create a checkout session for us, and then our backend is going to basically send back the session ID. Right? So once we get the session ID on our front end, we can then redirect the user to the proper checkout session. But because the checkout session, to actually create one, we need to use our secret key. That's the reason why we ultimately do this on the back end, because we can't share the secret key on our front end. We don't want to do that. That's the one that we need to make sure that users don't get a hold of. So that's why we ultimately need this back end, even if we're just trying to make a simple React application. So let's make a post request to this URL, which is /create checkout session. So going back to app.jsx, what I'm going to do is, first of all, I'm going to create a new folder inside the source directory. And I'm going to call this services. And then within here, I'm going to call this stripe.js. And we're going to import Axios from Axios. And I'm going to define our base URL. So this is the URL to reach our backend Express server. And so this is going to be http://localhost:3001. And keep in mind, this is probably a good point to actually use an environment variable, because obviously when you deploy to production, you're not going to be using localhost, but just for the sake of shortness of this video, let's ignore that, and we're just going to hard code it to localhost 3001. And then we're going to export default, and we're going to create an Axios instance. We're going to set that, and then set the default URL to be, or the base URL to be this variable that we defined. All right, so now we go back to our app component, and we're going to import that Stripe service. So we'll do import Stripe service from, and then we'll go into services and then grab Stripe. And what we're going to do const result equals await, and then we'll call, so I'm going to change this to response. We'll wait, and then we'll call the Stripe service. And we're going to do a post request, and we're going to send it to the create checkout session URL. So that's going to match up with this one right here. All right, so at that point, our backend server should then talk to the Stripe servers, and then it's going to return back that session ID. So let's just do a console.log response so we can see that session ID, and just to make sure everything's working so far. And it looks like there's an error, and yep, so since I'm using the await syntax, we have to make sure that we make this an asynchronous function. And now let's go back to our website. And let's hit buy now. And you can see we got a response. Now, keep in mind, if you guys are following along in this video, most likely you will have gotten an error.
And that's due to the fact that you haven't verified your account on Stripe. So I've already verified my account when I was doing kind of a dry run of this video, but I took a screenshot of what the error should look like on your end. So if you got an error, if you're taking a look at the console of your Express server, your backend, you should see an error that looks similar to this, where it says, in order to use checkout, you must set an account or business name at this specific link, and then you'll get this message saying, same exact thing, and then they'll give you that link. So what you should do is you should click that link. It's going to take you to the dashboard, and you're going to get a window that looks like this. So you just have to fill out your account name. You have to verify your phone number. You have to give your business a name. So just a few other things. If you're just kind of doing this for learning purposes or just for practice, just put in dummy information. You will have to put your phone number in to verify because it'll send you a code. But outside of that, it's okay if you just give dummy information outside of that. So do that, verify it, and then rerun the whole process of clicking the Buy Now button, and you should see that the request goes through this time. All right, so once you got your account verified, let's take a look at the request. And if we go under the data section, you'll see that we got the ID. So this is going to be the session ID for our specific Express checkout session that was created for that specific user. So now with this ID, what we can do is if we go back to our code, we then send a request to basically, we'll do await stripe.redirect to checkout. And we have to pass in one property, which is going to be the session ID. And this session ID, once again, is going to be grabbed from the previous response. And so if we go back to here, we do response.data.id, and that's going to get the session ID. So we'll do response.data.id. And we'll save that result. So we'll just do const result equals. And, once again, since we're doing asynchronous calls right here, we want to wrap this in a try-catch block. I'm just going to grab these and move that into that try statement. All right, and so this is going to redirect the user. So let's test that out now. I'm going to hit Buy Now. And now you can see that we got redirected. And what's nice is that we can see, the object that we created or the product called t-shirt, and it even loaded up the URL that we grabbed of that random t-shirt. And so here we've got the, this is the Express checkout page. So, this is Stripe manages this. You don't really have to design or anything. You just provide the product, the price, and the image. Now for testing purposes, Stripe makes this super simple. What they have is, if you go to this page right here, stripe.com/doc/testing, they give you a bunch of card numbers that you can use for testing purposes. So if you want to see a working scenario, you can just grab like this first one, this 4242 right here. And this is going to make sure that the numbers that you put in will result in a success or a purchase. And if you want to see certain failure codes, they have some cards for that as well. I think, what is it, disputes? I think it should be, I think it's these right here, testing for specific responses and errors. So you can see very specific errors where charge succeeds. We also have charge succeeds, but the address line check fails, zip code check fails. There's certain ones for not enough balance, card decline. So Stripe makes it really easy to test everything. But let's test out a working scenario. I'm going to just grab this 4242 number right here. We'll go back to our app. Email, just put in whatever, it doesn't really matter. Paste the card number in. For the month, for the expiration date and the CVC number, you can just put in any number. Just make sure that obviously the expiration date's in the future and not in the past. So I'm just going to do 2/22 CVC, just any number, any name, and then any zip code. And I'm just going to make this something that we can remember. So testing 1, 2, 3. So we'll do pay. Right, and so you can see we get that green check mark. And it redirects us back to the website. And this is actually important to note because if we go back to our app, we go to our server.js, right? We specified the success and cancel URL. So this is Stripe redirecting the customer back to these specific URLs. So if there is a successful purchase, right? The user didn't cancel it or the card didn't get declined, they're going to get redirected back to this URL, which is localhost:3000, which is where our React server is running. And then it's also adds this extra parameter of success equals true. And we add that just so that from React's perspective or the front end's perspective, when the user gets redirected back to us, we basically have a way of telling whether the user was able to successfully purchase the product or if they canceled it so that we can adjust the UI accordingly. And we also have one for the cancel URL in case they cancel it as well. And if you actually take a look at it, you can see the parameter right here, success equals true. So let's actually put in the logic for basically handling whether the customer was successful or if they canceled the payment in our React application. And you'll see that the Stripe documentation has a good example of that. So if we go down to, oh, what happened here? Let's refresh that. And we just scroll down to, it should be near the end, handle redirect back to checkout. Basically, they're just going to use the use effect hook and then just basically check for certain parameters, whether the parameter has a success or a cancel property, and then we can basically do certain things based off of those. So let's copy this use effect hook. Actually, I'm going to copy this use state hook here as well, and I'll just quickly explain what's happening. So let's go back to our app.jsx. And I'm going to put the use effect hook right at the top. And we need to make sure that we import use effect and use state. Okay, so what's happening is we're grabbing the query parameters right here, and we're saying that if there is a success in the query parameter, what we're going to do is we're going to grab this use state hook, and basically we have a variable called message, and we're going to set message to order was placed. You will receive an email confirmation. If we get a canceled, then it's going to say order was canceled. Continue to shop around. And so we're basically just using the set message function from the use state hook to set that. And then what we'll do is back in our UI, we'll just create an H2. And then here I'm just going to pass in the value of message, which is once again going to store either one of these messages depending on if the customer was successful or not. All right, so let's save that. And let's go back to our app. So let's try this again. All right, so we'll put in some information. And let's grab that testing number again. And then you can just put in any zip code. So let's hit that. It redirects us, and we can see that it says order was placed. You will receive an email confirmation. And actually, if we go to, well, I'm in guest view, so I can't actually see the React editor, but we'll ignore that. So you can see that it worked. Let's test out a failure scenario. I'm going to grab some failure numbers. So if I scroll down, oh, actually, no. For failure, we can just hit the back button. So if we decide to not go through the payment, we can just hit the back button. You'll see that the parameter is canceled equals true. And we can now see it says order canceled, continue to shop around and check out when you're ready. All right, guys. So that was the Stripe Express checkout flow. You can see it's really easy to integrate that into your application. It's really easy on the React side as well. Actually, really just a couple of lines of code on the back end. So now that we've wrapped that up, in the next section, we'll take a look at creating the custom checkout flow where we'll be able to kind of modify the flow a little bit more and make it more customized for our application. It's going to involve a little bit more work, but it does give us a little bit more flexibility. But at the end of the day, it's all a matter of, what do you feel more comfortable with? If you want to go the simple route, definitely just do the Express checkout session. It's super simple. If you need to tweak it for whatever reason, then we can do the custom checkout flow like we'll do in the next section. Okay, guys, so let's move on to the custom payment flow now. However, before we actually start coding it out, I do want to go over a little bit of theory on how the overall flow works so that you can actually understand, what is the React side of things doing? What is the Express server doing? How does Stripe fit into all of this? So if we select the custom payment flow option right here, and just scroll down, you can see React created a nice little diagram kind of explaining how all the pieces fit together. So we've got the customer, we've got a React front end, we've got our Express server, and then we've got these Stripe servers. And so when our customer is ready to make a purchase, we're going to send all the information about that purchase to our Express server. So that's going to include things like, what products does he want to buy? What is the total cost and things like that. And our Express server is going to send a post request to the Stripe servers to create a payment intent. And if you don't know what a payment intent is, Stripe defines it as an object to represent your intent to collect payment from a customer. So we're basically telling the Stripe servers, like, listen, we've got a customer who's ready to make a purchase. We need to make sure that you're ready for it. So we send that post request. And so Stripe is going to create that payment intent and return that payment intent object back to our Express servers. And within this payment intent object, we've got a client secret. So we're going to take that client secret and we're going to forward it to our React front end, the client. And with that client secret, what we can do is we can then call a method from the Stripe library called confirm card payment, which is going to basically talk directly to the Stripe servers now. So now we no longer include the Express servers. We send it directly to the Stripe servers, and we have to make sure we append the client secret to that message. So that's going to allow the Stripe servers to basically associate our method, associate our message to a specific payment intent that was created. So then once it gets that message, Stripe will then try to actually process the payment. And if it succeeds or if it fails, it's going to send that message directly back to the client. So hopefully that made sense. It's kind of actually a little similar to how the Express checkout worked, where the Express server needs to talk to the Stripe servers to get the session ID. We then forward the session ID to the client, then the client sends a message directly to the Stripe server. So that's kind of how all of the flows ultimately work. So for the custom payment flow on the Express side, we just have to set up another route, just like we did for the Express checkout. So it's going to be another post request. We're just going to set it to a different URL. So we're going to do app.post. And let's give it the URL that we want. So you can give this whatever name you want. I'm just going to give this create payment -intent. Just for documentation purposes, so that when you guys are looking over the GitHub repo, which post request or which route is for which flow, essentially. And then here, since we're going to do some asynchronous code, we're going to do a try catch block. And we're going to mark this function as async. All right, and the first thing we need to do is let's grab this Stripe object that we defined up here. And we'll call the payment intents .create method. All right, and so with this method, we have to pass two properties, which is the amount we want to create a payment intent for. So how much is the total purchase? And we also have to specify the currency. So we'll do amount, and I'm just going to hard code this value. Obviously, in an actual application, you wouldn't hard code it. You would, run some specific code that's going to basically calculate, what is the total cost of your entire shopping cart, and then based on that, you can pass that into this method. But for simplicity's sake, I'm going to hard code this to 4,000. Which, remember, this is going to be in cents. So 4,000 cents is $40. And then we go to currency. And it's going to be USD. And I'm going to save the result of that to a variable called payment intent equals await. And here we'll send back a response with the status of 200. And remember, the whole point of this is that we need to get back the client secret. So we're going to pass this back to the front end. I'm going to call this client_secret. And we're going to get the client secret from this payment intent object. So the Stripe servers are going to send it back. So we'll get it, and we can just grab it from payment intent client_secret. So we're basically just forwarding that secret back to the React front end. And then, if you want to just do a console.log for error, just in case you run into some errors. All right. And so for the Express backend, that's all you have to do for the custom payment flow. Now, from the documentation purposes, if you want to see everything that I just did, you can just select on custom payment flow and then just select on node, and it's going to give you the same exact instructions. But anyways, in the next section, we'll then move on to React. React is going to take a little bit longer because there's a few more things that we have to do from a UI perspective and from a React perspective. It's a little bit more complicated with the custom payment flow, but even then, it's still not too bad. All right, guys, so it's time to move on to the front end for the custom checkout flow. And before we proceed any further, I just want to comment out all the code that we set up for the pre-built checkout page so that it doesn't interfere with this scenario. So we'll comment out the use effect hook as well as this state variable. We don't technically need this handle Stripe checkout function anymore, so I'm just going to comment that out. And I'm also going to comment out the H2 and the button. I'm going to leave it in our code so that when you guys check the Git repo, you can always reference this later on. I want to make sure that you guys have the code for both scenarios. But now what we have to do is we have to install two libraries. So the first one is Stripe.js, which we already installed for the pre-built checkout flow. So the other library that we need to install is this React-Stripe-js. Now this library, it basically makes it very easy to integrate Stripe into a React project because it includes these pre-built element components, right? And these components basically handle all of the logic necessary for retrieving your credit card, your expiration date, and your CVC number, and it handles all the validation as well, so that you don't need to handle all of that. Stripe makes it very easy by giving us these pre-built components. And these components, they're referred to as Stripe elements. And so you'll see when we proceed further, we make use of these elements to actually retrieve the credit card number and things like that. So let's do an npm install for this package right here. So make sure you're in the client directory, and we can do an npm install. All right, so now that that's installed, let's set up our component. So what I want to do is I want to create a specific component to kind of manage the actual Stripe logic. And so this is technically optional. You don't need to create a separate component for this, but this is something that the documentation does as well. So we might as well follow along. And it's nice to have one component that just kind of handles that. It really follows the React mentality of things. So we'll create a separate component. And if you take a look at the documentation, right, so we can create a component called cardsection.js. So this will represent the actual input form for the credit card number and things like that. So I'm going to create a new folder to store my components because we will have another component that we'll add later on. And we'll call it card section just like they do, just so that, if you ever need to, reference any of this, then it'll match up with the documentation. And so this is just going to be a regular functional component. So we're going to import React, and then we'll have our function, and then we got to make sure we export it. But there's a couple other things that we got to import. And so the next thing that we want to import is card element. So we're importing the card element component from the Stripe React or the React Stripe library. So we can just copy this. And we can just paste that here. So now we have access to that card element. And if you see down here where we render this out, it's really just a pre-built component. And we have the option of passing in a options prop. So where we can actually go and style that component because, this component is going to have a lot of default colors, and you're going to want to make sure that this component matches up from a style perspective to the rest of your website. So Stripe made sure that, you get a lot of flexibility when it comes to styling this component so that it looks the way that you want it to look. And if you kind of want to play around with it, well, first of all, if you want to take a look at the documentation, you can always check out style components, and then, they've got tremendous documentation that you can take a look at to see, what classes automatically get assigned to it and what things that you would need to change certain colors and text and things like that. But if you go to the interactive tutorial, they actually have this section where you can, change the text or the font family and the text color as well as the invalid color to see what that looks like in real time. So like if I started typing in, invalid stuff, well, I guess that's a valid number. I'm trying to set up invalid. Yeah, so that's an example of it being invalid, and that color is taken from this invalid color. So you can change these values and play around with it just to see what it looks like in real time so that you can get the values that you ultimately want. And it even provides the CSS for the button. But anyways, what we're going to do is for this options prop, right? They're storing all of that information in a variable called card element options. And then, they include some color and styles and things like that. So they're setting the color here, the font family, font size, and then the invalid color. So we're just going to copy this directly for now, because ultimately I don't really care what color it looks like. I just want to make sure you guys understand how this Stripe integration actually works. So we got that in there, and then we can copy the label and the card element as well. And on top of that, we also have the CSS for styling it. So they give us some example CSS. So we could just copy this directly as well and create this same CSS file. So I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to create a new file under our source directory. And I'm just going to call this card CSS.css. Paste that in there, and then under our card section, we can import that CSS file. So to import it, you can just pass in a path, and you just do an import, pass the path of that file. So we can do import, and then for us, we want to go up a directory, and then we want card CSS.css. Let's save that. And let me go back to the other terminal. So it looks like everything's still running. So I think if we take a look at our app, and let me just remove that. Let's do a save all, actually. And I also realized, so we won't actually see any changes because we actually haven't imported into our app component. There's a few other things that we need to do before proceeding further, actually. And so first things first, what you have to do is we have to set up the elements provider, right? So the elements provider has to wrap any of our actual React elements for it to actually work. And so this is just kind of a requirement. And the way that Stripe works is that you have to wrap whatever section of your app is handling the logic for accepting payments. You want to make sure that you wrap this with the elements provider. And this also comes from the React Stripe library. And so in this example or this tutorial, right, they're just wrapping, their entire app. That's because it's a small demo app. You don't technically have to wrap your entire app. You can just wrap the portion of your app that's going to handle the credit card payment. So technically, we could just wrap, our one simple component in it, but I'm just going to follow the tutorial. And we can just wrap our entire app just to keep things simple. So let's go to app.jsx. And we can do outside of this div. First of all, let's make sure we import the React Stripe library and import the elements object. And then we can just copy this as well. And remove the checkout form. We'll create that in a bit. And we could take the div that we had before, move it into the elements provider, save that, let it get automatically formatted. And so that's all you should have to do is just, we've got our app wrapped by this elements provider. And you also have to pass in your Stripe promise, right? So we created that up here. This is where our, I forget what that stands for. Is that private key? Or public key. I think that stands for public key. So this is where our public key is configured. This is where Stripe is loaded. So you just want to make sure you pass that into the elements provider. And so this elements provider is just going to make sure that we can actually make use of our specific React Stripe components that we've created. All right, so now what I want to do is inside this div, let's import this new component that we just made, the card section component. So back in app.jsx, let's do card section, and I'm going to let VS Code automatically import it for me. All right, so we've got that imported right here. And we should hopefully not see any issues at this point. So now if we take a look, you can see we've got something. Okay, so yeah, we've got it. Obviously, it's massive, right? It's covering up the full width, which is not a good look. But once again, I don't want to focus too much on what the overall look is. If we just want to make it a little bit easier on the eyes, we can go back to this card CSS, and width, we could just set this to, I don't know, let's say 400 pixels. Yeah, I think that's better. And to make it a little bit easier to see behind this white background, I'm going to create a new file under the source directory. I'm just going to call this app.css. And here I'm just going to set the background color on the body. So save that. And under app.jsx, we'll import that. All right, and so that looks a little bit better. And so now you can see we've got the card number that we can fill in. And obviously there's already some nice invalidation happening. And once again, this is all handled by Stripe. We didn't have to do any of that. We just imported a simple component and we get all of that. So it handles the invalidation, or sorry, the validation of any of your credit card numbers. It'll check to see if this date is actually in the future as well. So like if you try to pick a date that already happened, so like if I did 01, I don't know, 91, right? That's obviously an expiration date that, this credit card's already expired. So, React Stripe, once again, I'm just trying to say that they handled a lot of the logic for us. So we've got our UI element to collect the credit card information, but we have no actual way to actually complete the payment. So let's go ahead and create a form. So we'll create a new component that's going to be a form. We're going to have to add a button so that the user can actually submit the data. And then we'll have to implement the logic of actually submitting the data. So let's go ahead and do that. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a new component. And so, once again, I'm just going to follow along, with the documentation, right? So what we want to do is let's create a new component called checkout form. So I'm going to go under components. We'll do a new file. Call this checkout form. And this will be another simple functional component. And instead of rendering out the card section here in the app.jsx, I'm going to remove that and I'm going to place this in our checkout form. So our checkout form is going to be rendering this. And then beneath the card section, we're going to add a button. So this will be the submit button. I'm going to give it a class of, we'll just say donate button. And then, well, not donate button. How about, yeah, we'll call it donate button for now. And we'll say pay now, or whatever text you want it to say. All right, and I'm going to change this to be a form element. So this will just be a form. And then let's render out this checkout form in our app.jsx. So here we'll do checkout form. Now this should ideally not have changed too much. Going back to our app, looks like we've got an error. Let's just make sure I did a save all. Card section is not defined. Let's take a look. And I think I forgot to import card section. So let me just quickly just do a card and then let VS Code import it for me. Okay, so we've got our UI component for collecting the card still. And then we've got this big gross button. So let's style this button a bit. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy and paste some CSS styles. I recommend you guys just pull this from the GitHub repo. There's no point in me writing it out. This isn't meant to be a video on CSS. And I took all this CSS styles from one of the pay buttons for Stripe in one of their examples. So it's got the Stripe colors. It looks very nice. The only thing is, let's actually change this to 400 pixels to match up with the other component. And so, well, let's make it a little bigger. 450. That's still too much. All right, let's try 425. Good enough. All right, so we've got our pay button now. We're going to want to set up an on-click event handler. So going back to our checkout form, I'll set up an on-click. And I'll just call this handle submit. Actually, we can just do this on the form itself, actually. So we can go to the form and just say on submit equals handle submit. And one thing we want to do is we want to pass in the event. We want to make sure that we do an e.prevent default. This will keep the page from reloading. In a React app, we never want to reload or then we lose all of our state. All right, so now before we proceed any further, there's a couple of things that we need to import from the Stripe library. And these are just used for initializing Stripe and some of the elements. And these are going to be, we're going to import use Stripe. So this is actually a hook from the Stripe library, as well as use elements. And this is going to be from at Stripe/React-Stripe-JS. And keep in mind, these two hooks are really just there to allow us to actually complete the payment process. So you need these to actually make the payment. And to set up these hooks inside our component, at the top, we'll do const stripe equals use stripe. So it's really easy. That's all you have to do. And the same thing with the elements. So we'll do const elements equals use elements. And so we've really already loaded up Stripe. And so now in our handle submit function, what we can do is, first of all, when we go to submit the payment, we want to check if Stripe has successfully loaded up. So we'll do if not Stripe. So if Stripe is essentially undefined, or if elements is undefined. So if either one of these has not successfully loaded up, we're just going to return. So we're not going to actually continue with the payment because Stripe hasn't loaded up. This is just a safety measure, really. And now what we're going to do is we're going to make a call to our backend. So this is where we start the whole process. And if you guys already forgotten the flow, I recommend you go back and check this out. So at the top, remember, we've got that nice little document or that topology that kind of goes over the whole payment process. And so remember, on the React side, when we want to, make a payment, right? The first thing that we want to do is hit our API endpoint that we created on our server. And so there, once it gets to our server, and actually taking a look at the code, I think it makes more sense for me to show you guys. We created the create payment intent. So we're going to create a payment intent, and our backend will then send a payment intent to Stripe. And we're going to send like the total amount as well as the currency. And Stripe is going to return back a payment intent. So remember, a payment intent is just letting Stripe know that we have a customer that is intending to make a purchase, but we actually haven't completed the purchase. We're just saying that we're just letting Stripe know, hey guys, someone wants to make a purchase. So Stripe will return the payment intent. And within the payment intent, it's going to have one important property, which is the client secret. And this is what we want to send back to React, because React and our front end, to actually complete the payment, they need to know this special value. So once they get this value from our backend, they can then, React can then go ahead and complete the payment. Because remember, this is just to kind of set up the whole initial process. But only once we get the client secret on the front end can the front end then complete the whole process. So let's go back down. And let's go back to the front end, and we'll say, we'll do a const response equals await. And we have to import the Stripe service, right? So that's going to be, this API right here. We'll do import Stripe service from services, and then we want Stripe. All right, so now we can do a Stripe service dot post, and we're going to send this to create dash payment dash intent. Set up a catch as well. And for now, we'll just do a console.log error. And on top of that, let's do a we'll do a console.log of response just to see what the response looks like. And let's save that. And it looks like I got an error. Let's see. Yep. And I forgot to make this function an async function because we are using the async await syntax. Make that async. And I forgot to put an E here. All right, so that looks better. And let's get the test card numbers. So if you go back to this testing page, we can grab this number where it's 4242, just repeat it over and over again. I'm going to paste that in there. Once again, you can give any month, any year, as long as it's sometime in the future, any CVC, any zip code. We'll hit pay now. And look at that. So we got a response back, so it looks like it worked. And we want to go under data, and you can see that our backend gave us our client secret, which ultimately came from the Stripe API. So with this magical key, we can then go ahead and complete the payment because right now we have not charged the credit card. We've just created a payment intent. But with this value, we can now go and make a API call directly to Stripe instead of going back to our backend, and we can say, "Hey Stripe, I want to complete this payment." And I've got this client secret. So they'll know which payment we're actually trying to complete. It's like a code that kind of matches up with, all the different payments that you may have set up. All right, so moving back here, the next thing that we want to do is, I'll keep that console.log response for now. And we'll say const result equals await. And then we'll go to Stripe. So remember, we loaded Stripe from this hook. And we can say Stripe dot confirm card payment. So this is the method that ultimately charges the credit card. And there's a few things that we want to pass in. So first of all, the first argument that we want to pass in is that this client secret right here. So we can say response dot data dot client underscore secret. Okay, and the next thing we want to pass in is an object. And so this object is going to include the payment method. So we'll do payment method. And we'll say card. And we say elements, right? So now we're retrieving this value from the hook. And we'll say elements dot get element. And then card element. So what this is really doing is, if you go back to our card section component, right, we've got a card element. And because our entire app is wrapped in this elements provider, when we go to this checkout and we do an elements.getElement card element, it's going to automatically find that component for you automatically, and it's going to pull all the data, from that form. So it's going to be able to pull out that card number and send it to the Stripe backend. So it's really handling all the logic for you when you call this specific method. All right, and let's do a console.log result, and let's just see what happens. I'm going to save, and once again, let's put the same information in, and then let's do a pay now. All right, so we've got the first one. So that first console.log is, remember, just hitting our Express backend to retrieve the client secret, and then when we go directly to confirm the card payment, you can see that we got this information. And I think you can see the amount, which is 4,000 cents, which is, I guess, $40. Capture method, we've got the client secret, we've got a few other things, but really, all I really care about is status, which is it succeeded. So that means we have successfully completed the card payment. And I'm just curious what other information's here. So this just lets us know it's a card. So nothing really that interesting. You really are just looking for, what is the status? Was it successful? And so here we've successfully completed a card payment. If you go back to your dashboard and then click on payment so it refreshes, or maybe we have to hit refresh manually. And you can see we got that $40 payment. And so you could see this in the dashboard and it looks like it worked. Now, there's obviously still a lot of issues with our little demo application, right? We're giving the user no actual feedback on what's happening. So if I hit pay now, and as a user, I'm like, well, did it work? I don't know, right? There's no loading indicator. There's nothing of that nature. So what am I naturally going to do? Let me hit it again. Let me hit it again. The only problem is I'm charging them over and over again. So you go to payments, hit refresh. Look at that. I've just now charged my user 2 extra times. Obviously, bad user experience, unacceptable. You're going to receive lots of complaints. So let's set up the logic for making sure that, well, first of all, we want to make sure the user can't submit the button or submit the payment, if they've already submitted. So we want to make sure we disable that button. We want to make sure there's some kind of loading indicator. We want to set up some kind of error handling. We also want to set up some logic for letting the customer know that their credit card payment went through and everything was successful. Now, to set up error handling and also handling of loading state and things like that, we're going to have to set up a few React hooks to manage state. So right at our top, right below these 2 other Stripe hooks, first of all, we're going to have to import the use state hook. So I'm going to let VS Code import that for me. And so we've got the use state hook right here. And what we're going to do is I'm going to have one of these hooks for the error state. So we'll have error and then set error. And we can set that equal to use state. And these are all just going to be Booleans. So they're either going to be true or false. And so by default, we're going to start off with no error. We're going to have one for loading. And so I'm just going to do loading. Actually, I'll call this processing. And we'll call this set processing. And this equals use state. Once again, default is going to be false. And then finally, we'll have one for success. So if we successfully complete a payment, this hook will set, the succeeded variable to be true. And once again, the default's going to be false. Okay, and that should be all that we need to do with regards to state. So now after here, once const result completes, and we got that information, we can start setting, well, actually before that, right when we start to make a API call to our backend, we want to make sure we set everything back to false no matter what. So we're going to do set error. We're going to set it to false. Set succeeded. That's also going to be set to false, just in case if we had some previous lingering state. And then now, since we're about to make a payment attempt, we're going to set processing to be true. Right? So this is going to set it to true. And then after it completes at the bottom, what we want to do is we want to make sure that first of all, if we take a look at the output, just so we can understand what it looks like, you can see that we've got this this result, and the result has a payment intent property. Whoops, where'd it go? And so if it's successful, then we can go under the payment intent object and grab the status. However, if there's an error, the error won't be inside the payment intent. It'll be outside. So we can just call it result.error. So what we're going to do is we're just going to set up some if statements. And we're going to say, if result.error, then first of all, we can do a console.log. And we might as well print that out just for troubleshooting purposes. And then we can do a set. We want to make sure we set the error to be true. Else, we want to do a check, and we can say result dot, right? And so now we can go under payment intent and then status. And if that equals succeeded, right, then we know that our payment succeeded, we could set the set succeeded function to set the necessary state. Payment intent dot status equals succeeded. And then, we could just do a console.log and just say, yay, payment succeeded. And then now we set succeeded to be true. And then after all that completes, we want to make sure we set processing back to false. So this is basically our loading state. So we're saying we're no longer loading at this point. And then also, well, I'll just leave this as a console.log error here. I think this hopefully paints a good enough picture on how to handle loading an error with the Stripe integration. But just to quickly go over everything again. So what happens is the user, when they click on this button, they're going to submit this form, which calls this event handler. And then this event handler runs. And what we first do is we first check to see Stripe is loaded up. If it's not, then we just return and don't do anything. If it is loaded, then we go into this try catch block. We set loading to be true because we're now officially, trying to, submit the payment. We reset the two other states, right? Because we don't, if there was previously an error, we want to make sure we clear that out. And then we try to fetch the data. So first, we actually make an API call to our backend so that we can get the client secret. Then we confirm the card payment by passing the client secret, as well as our element right here. We pass in the card element. And then when we get the response back, we check to see if there's an error. If there is an error, we set error to true. And then if there isn't an error, we check to see if the status is set to succeeded. And if it has succeeded, then we set succeeded to be true. And then after all of that, we want to make sure we set loading back down to false. All right. And so at this point, technically, from the user's perspective, they will not notice any difference, right? Because we're not actually making the UI respond to the current state. So let's work on that now. So the first thing that I want to do is, first of all, on the button, what we can do is actually set the disabled status. So if we do disabled equals, we can say this button will be disabled, first of all, if Stripe hasn't loaded yet. So we can just outright disable the button if that's the case. And so let's hit refresh, and it looks like what happened here. All right, guys, so it looks like it just had a couple of typos. And so just make sure you spell succeeded right. I think I need 2 E's here, and then make sure processing is spelled right. There's a lot of C's, a lot of E's, and I butchered a couple of things. But now I got it working. And so once again, still, even though our button is disabled when Stripe hasn't loaded, that if we refresh the page, you may see it go gray for a split second. But it'll be really hard to see because it loads up really quickly. What we can also do is we can also say if it's in a processing state. So if processing is set to true, we want to disable it. And so now if we go, let me copy a test card again. When we go to submit this, we should see it ideally turn gray, and the user won't be able to submit again accidentally. So let's hit pay now. And so we didn't see anything change. However, you will see that the button is in a disabled state. We just got to make sure that we set up the CSS to change colors when the button is disabled. And that's very easy to do. We just have to add one CSS property. So let's go back to app.css. And I'm just going to paste this in here. So we're just saying that when the button is disabled, I'm going to change the background color to dark gray. And so now, hit pay now. Look at that. It turns gray. And then once it's finished processing, it turns back to blue. All right. And from a loading perspective, I think that's all the feedback we need to give to the user. I think it's pretty clear when you click that and it turns gray. It's loading. However, it may be nice to just say it's loading inside the button just in case. And so going back to the checkout form where it says pay now, what we can do is you can add in a little JavaScript and say, if we're currently processing, so if that's true, we can use the good old ternary operator and say, we can say loading ... But if we're not in a processing state or if we're not loading, then we can return pay now. And that should be in quotations. And let's get these number again. See, now it says loading, and then it flips back. So I think that's good enough. The next thing to do is let the customer know if we were successful in completing the payment or if there was an error. And so what we can do is right above the card section, I'm just going to add a little bit more JavaScript, and we're going to call a function called render error message. And then one right below that, and we'll just call this render success message. This isn't going to be the prettiest UI, by the way, guys, but hopefully it just gets the point across. So we'll do const render error message. And we'll say that we'll just use a simple ternary operator and say that if there is an error, right? So if we go back to our state, right? If this is true, then we will return, let's see, we can return actually a div. And we'll just say error processing payment. However, if there's no error, then we're just going to return null. So we're not going to return anything. And then we can copy this pretty much. Paste this here, change this to render success message. And then instead of checking to see if there's an error, we can check to see if we succeeded. And then this time we just change this to, payment succeeded. All right, so when we generate the form, we'll check to see, was there an error? If so, this function will render out the error message. And then this line of code is going to check to see if there's a success. And if there is, it's going to generate a message. So it's always going to be one or the other because we have if statements checking those. All right, so let's first test out a success. All right, and so there you go. We can see that payment succeeded. So that's good. Let's see if we can find an example of a failure. I think they should give us some test cards. Let's see. Testing for specific errors. Charge. Most of these are charge succeeds, but something else. I just need a generic failure. Okay, let's try this one. And then let's try now. So it clears out the previous success. And there you go. Look at that. Error processing payment. All right. So it looks like our error handling is now looking pretty good. I guess the only other thing that we may need to change is that this obviously only accounts for errors from Stripe. However, there's also network errors where maybe we're not even able to reach either our backend or the Stripe servers. So you may want to instead add some extra lines here if we catch an error and say, here we want to set error to true. And then ultimately you want to move set processing back all the way down at the bottom underneath the try catch block instead of having it right here. And so that way we can also, handle network related errors instead of just Stripe errors, because those are also a possibility. So we could try that again just in case. We'll run through the two scenarios. We'll start off with the error this time. All right, let's try that. All right, we got that. That's good. And then let's try a success. All right, and we've got payment success. So that's all I wanted to show you guys when it comes to incorporating Stripe into a React or a Node application. It's pretty simple, pretty straightforward. You can see that the Stripe team did an excellent job of making it really, really easy to integrate it into any application. And so, at this point, if that's all you guys wanted to see, then feel free to turn off this video. But how I am going to go over my simple little project that I wanted to show you guys, where we set up that little donation fight sobriety page where you can send me money so that I can continue to drink as much alcohol as possible. I highly recommend you donate. My website is up and running, so you guys can actually donate to this very, very important cause. Obviously you want to make sure you help out others in a time of need. Don't be selfish. All right, guys, so let's move on to building out our project. And so what we're going to build out is this website right here. I just want to quickly recap it. I know we did this early on in the video, but what we're going to build is this simple page right here. We've got a image at the top. We've got my avatar as well as the header, and then a couple of social media icons. Then we've got my support button. So this is where you can make a donation. So when you select this, this is going to open up a modal, and this is where we can actually make a donation to my fund. So, if I wanted to give $10, I can do that. And then I can put in my card number, and then we can do a pay now. And then if it's successful, we should see a green check mark. So that means the payment went through. Not really the most prettiest UI. Then we can close that out, and we should see that, down here, we've got this box right here where we've got a progress indicator. And we did see that this just went up real quick. So this is going to let the user know, how much we've raised so far out of my $1 million goal. To the left, I've got my story. And so that's really about it. I guess the one other thing I wanted to quickly show you again is that, if we do this, put in another $10. But this time, if I grab a credit card that's not a valid credit card, so let me find one that'll get declined, like this one right here. We should see a different pop-up message. Instead of that green check mark, we should see that the payment failed. So let's let that run. It's going to take a little bit. And then so here we could see that the payment failed. Once again, not a pretty UI, but that is what we're going to build out. And just because I felt like it, I did make this website mobile responsive. So if we go to the Chrome developer tools, and so right now, this is full screen essentially, or on a computer. And as we go down, you'll see that both of these boxes shrink. Nothing up at the top or anything like that really changes. But as we keep going smaller and smaller, eventually we'll hit that media query. And so now things are stacked vertically. All right, so that's all we're going to build out. And so let's get to it. All right, so what I'm going to do is let me exit out of the Chrome developer tools. And so I guess I want you guys to keep in mind that the left tab right here, this is going to be the completed website. And then this is going to be the one that we're actively working on. So this is kind of the state that we left our project in, where we just got the basic input form and nothing else. So we're gonna comment out some of the code that we don't need so that we can get started with this project. And so let's go to our front end, and let's go to our index. Actually, let's go to our app.jsx. And I'm going to comment out a few things. So we no longer need this checkout form right here in our app.jsx. So we're going to remove that. That checkout form is only going to be part of that modal. So we can exit that out. And let's just save that. Let's just make sure we have nothing on our screen now. So we should get a blank and empty screen at this point. And what I also want to do is let's go to our app.css. And I'm going to remove this background color. So we don't need that for now. And we should have a white background. So let's add some base CSS to our project, just so that we can kind of get a overall style for our website. And so right at the top, what we can do is we're going to set the box sizing to be border box. And I'm also going to zero out the margin as well as the padding. And I also want to get a custom font for our website. So I'm going to go to Google Fonts and we're going to get a font called Quicksand. So I'm going to grab Quicksand and let's just get all of the weights. And then let's embed this. So then we can just copy this right here. And then we can go back to our index.html and add that. All right, so we got our access to our main font for our project, and we can add that font family to our CSS. So under body, I'm going to do font-family. And we can do quicksand. And then sans serif. And the next thing I want to do is I want to add a class under our app.jsx. So the main div that's going to wrap our project, I'm going to give this a class of container. And so that's just so that when we look at the final project, you can see that everything kind of, if I maximize this, there is some space in between things. So I just want to add that container class so that we can kind of squeeze everything into a certain amount of space. And if we go back to our app.css, what I'll do is I'm going to add a container class at the top. So we'll do a .container. And I'm just going to set the max width to be 1400 pixels. And I'm going to set the margin to be 0 auto. So this is going to center all of our content right in the middle of our page from a horizontal perspective. And then I'm going to add just a little bit of padding. And I'm kind of zoomed in, so I guess that's why you guys can't see. But if I zoom out, you can see how the website is all within that 1400 pixel range. And so it's nice and evenly centered. So that's coming from the container class. All right, and so the next thing I want to do is I want to add these images. So we've got 1, 2, and 3 images. So I've got all 3 of these images in the Git repo. So I'm just going to copy them into this project. You guys can do the same thing as well. And inside the source directory, we'll create a new folder. I'm going to call this assets. So this is going to be where we store all of our images. And I'm just going to paste those images into there. So we've got 3 images. We've got avatar. So that's going to be the avatar image. We've got the banner image. And then we've got the monkey image. And now what I'm going to do is so that we don't clutter up the app.jsx, I'm going to create a new folder. I'm going to call this pages. Even though we've only got one single page for this app, I am going to just kind of structure it nicely. So we'll get the pages directory, and then within there, I'm going to create a page called main. So this is going to be the page that contains all of our content. And just like all the other components, this is going to be a simple functional component. And the first thing that we want to do is, you can see in this page, the first thing that we have is this image. So let's import this image from our assets folder. And so importing an image within React, we can do an import. And I think we can just call this banner image. Feel free to give it any name that you want. And then we'll import it from, let's go up a directory. Then we want to go to assets. And then let's get, what did I call it? Banner.jpg. All right, so now if I hit save, nothing should happen yet because we're obviously not rendering anything out. We've got the image imported, but we actually have to embed it into our JSX. And so what we'll do is I'm going to open up this div right here. And I'm going to add another div. And I'm going to give it a class name of banner-image so that I can give it some style. And I'm also going to embed some styles within here as well. So I'm going to do style equals. And so this is the way you do an inline style within React. So we just do style, and then you need the 2 curly braces. And then any property that you would normally do in CSS, you can use here. The only difference is that we don't use dashes. Instead, we're going to go camel case. So instead of background, dash image or something like that, you would do background, capital I, and then image. And then we can set this to be, we want then the URL, right? Because you use that syntax. And then we're going to pass in the banner image that we imported. Okay, and if we take a look now, we should still see nothing, and that's just because this div has no actual height, so we don't see anything. It'll still be in inside the page, but since it has no height, we can't see it. So we can go back to our CSS file, and we can give it some height. And I'm going to go beneath all of this Stripe stuff now, and we'll target that banner-image class, and I'm just going to give it a height of 300 pixels. And a width of 100%, so it stretches across the page. And then just to kind of center it the way I want to, I'm going to give it well, actually, let's just see what this looks like so far. And right now, once again, we don't see anything, and that's because I forgot to actually render out this component within our app.jsx. So within app.jsx, between, inside this div with the class of container, I'm going to import that main component. So I'm going to let VS Code import it for me. And so now we've got it right here, import main. So now if I save this, we've got our image, but you can see it's not centered the way I want it to, right? Because if I look here, we want to focus on the main character. So let's move him around, and we can do that by using a little bit of CSS. And we can give it a background -size of cover. And we can give it a background position. This is kind of the important one where we're going to move the position of the background image. I'm going to say 50% and 30%. And this is something that I just kind of had to play around with until I got him kind of centered nice in the middle of the page. All right, so let's move on. The next thing we want to do is add the avatar. All right, so back to our main component, we're going to import the avatar as well. And so we can use the same syntax. We'll do import avatar from, and then same directory, and then we just got to reference avatar.png. And now between the banner div, let's create another div. And this time we're going to give it a class of avatar-container. So we'll do avatar-container. And then within this div, I'm going to pass in an image. And I'm going to give this image a class of avatar. And then for the source, we can now reference avatar, right? So now we're referencing this image. All right, so let's take a look. You can see it's a massive image, so we're going to have to add some CSS to make that tolerable. All right, so moving back to our app.css, let's give it some CSS. So we'll do avatar. So this is the container for the image. And I'm just going to add some margin to the top to give it some spacing. We got 40 pixels. And then we want text align center. I want to center it, of course. And so now you can see we've got the 40 pixels in between. Then moving on to the actual image itself, we can reference it by calling the avatar class. And the first thing I want to do is I want to give it a border. So if you go back here, you can see there's this small green border, which is kind of the theme of the website, that nice little green color. So we can do border. It's going to be solid 0.2 pixels. Then RGB of 66, 214, and then 170. All right, we've got the border, but the image is still massive. So let's give it some size. I'm going to set the width to be 160. And I'm going to set the height to be the same thing. All right, so now it's a little bit more tolerable, and now we just got to make it circular. And so to make it circular, we can do border-radius of 50%. All right, there you go. All right, now beneath the image, or between the avatar, we've got this header saying fighting sobriety 1 beer at a time. So let's add that. That's just going to be an H2, I believe. So we'll add the H2. Let's give it a class as well. So we'll do class name equals. I'll just call this head content. And then we'll just give our text. And we also want to add some styling to that H2. So we'll do head-content. I'm going to set the font-weight to be 100. I'm going to set the font size to 36 pixels. And I'm going to set the text align to center. All right, looks pretty good so far. Next thing, we got to get these social media icons. And so for the icons, I used a library called React Icons. It makes it really easy to work with icons within React. So you can just Google that, take a look at that, and I'll show you guys how we can use that. But we got to do an npm install React Icons. So let me open up a new terminal, move into the client directory, and we'll do an npm install React-icons. I think it was React Icons. Yep. And so while that's installing, let's go back to our main component. Now beneath our H2, we're going to create a new div. This is going to be a div that wraps all of our social media icons. And I'm just going to call this a social, or give it a class of social icons. And we're going to have, I think it's 4 social media icons. Yeah, 4. So let's create 4 divs. All 4 of these divs are going to have a class of social icon, and then they're going to have another class depending on what the icon is. So for this first one, I'm going to give it a class of social-icon, as well as a class of social-media-Twitter. And I'm just going to copy this and paste it 4 times, and then we're just going to change this second class. So the first one's Twitter, the second one is going to be Instagram, and the third is going to be YouTube, and the fourth is going to be LinkedIn. All right, so now let's get the icons. So these aren't really doing anything right now. So to import an icon from the React icon library, it's very easy. You can just go to the documentation, and you can take a look at all the different icons it supports. So they support font icon, ant design icons. I think they probably got material design somewhere in here. So they got a lot of the common icons. Yeah, so they got material design. I think I used Font Awesome for everything. So let's go to Font Awesome. And this is the way you actually import an icon. So you just do import, and then you pass in whatever icon name that you want. So if you wanted this Apple icon, you do FA Apple. And then you just import it from React Icons /FA. And the /FA is because we're using the Font Awesome. However, if we went to material design, you can see it's /MD. So let's go back to Font Awesome, and I'll just let you know which icons we want to import. So I'm going to do import. We'll do named import, and we want FA Twitter. We want FA Instagram. We want FA YouTube. And then we want FA LinkedIn in. I'm not sure why it's spelled like that. What's the second in, but that's all right. And then we want to import this from React-icons /FA. So we've got these imported, and now all we have to do is just reference them by using this specific name. So under Twitter, we go down here. I can just say FA Twitter, just like any other React component. And whoops. And let's see what that looks like. So you can see our Twitter icons down here. All right, and then let's do the same thing for the other social media icons. So we can do FA, and then the next one is, where's Instagram? There we go, FA Instagram. We'll add the YouTube one as well. And then finally the LinkedIn. All right, so that should be the base. We've got our 4 icons. It's now time to style them. So in our app.css, let's reference the container that wraps all of our social media icons first. And I'm going to make it a display of flex because right now they're listed vertically. When we make them flex, it'll move horizontally. And then we, well, let's just take a look at what that looks like right now. So now it's horizontal. We do want to center it. You won't notice a difference right now, I don't think. But once we finish everything else, we'll notice that. So we'll do center. Actually, I think we will notice it now. Yeah, so it's moved to the center exactly how we want it. And then, I just want to give it a little bit of space between the two. So I'm going to add a margin to the top. 20 pixels. There you go. Now let's style the individual icons. And just to make sure we're all on the same page, I gave each of these icons a class of social icon, and that's social icon without an S because the S represents the kind of the wrapping container. So we're going to reference all of the individual icons with the social icon class. We'll do social-icon. First things first, let's add a little bit of margin to the left and right. So we'll do 10 pixels. It's going to give them a little bit of space between them. And let's give them a little bit of more width. So I'll give it 80 pixels. And let's also give it a height of 80 pixels as well, because they are going to be round. And let's give it a border. And going back to the completed website, right? So this is going to be the same kind of border that we have on the avatar. So we can pretty much just copy the same border, I think. Maybe change up a few things. So 1 pixel, solid, and then same color, which is going to be RGB, 66, 214, and 170. Okay, so we've got that. Obviously, we're going to want to make this a circle, and we're obviously going to want to center the icon within the parent div. I think the default's going to be a background color of white, but let's just add it in there just in case. And now the trick to get this to be centered, what we can do is we can set the display of the parent div, so like this div or this div, to be a display of flex. And then we can set the flex direction to be a column so that it goes up and down, and then we can center it using justify content center. That's a cheap little trick that you can do to center an item within a div. And that's what I'm going to use. So we're going to set this to be a display of flex. And then we're going to set the flex direction to be a column. All right. And so now it shouldn't change anything right now. But if we add just a few more styles. So now if I set the justify content to be center, it's going to vertically center it. Yep, so now we can see it's vertically centered. However, we want to center it horizontally as well, so it's dead center. And the way to do that is going to be setting the width of the social media icons to be 100%. So I'm going to grab these social dash icon and then any SVG. So these are SVG icons. So this is actually grabbing the icon itself. So if we take a look at this in the developer tools, you can see you've got the div and then you got an SVG. So the SVG is what the icon is. So I'm just grabbing that SVG and I'm going to set the width to be 100%. And so now we have it centered. And let's give it a color as well. So I'm going to do color, RGB 66, 214, and then 170. And then lastly, I'm going to make them a little bit bigger. So I'm going to set the font size to be 42 pixels. And going back to social icon here, let's make these round now. So we can do a border dash radius of 50%. And there you go. So we've got our social media icons, but we don't have that hover effect where the colors essentially flip. So the icon changes to the white, and then everything else in the background changes to that nice green color. So to target the hover effect, we can do dot social dash icon and then get the hover. And we're going to set the background color to be that green color. So we can copy this RGB right here. Now this is going to be a little bit tricky, but when we hover over the icon, or sorry, the entire div surrounding the icon, we want the icon to turn white. Now, if I went to this social icon and changed the color to be white, I'm going to show you what happens, and it's not going to be exactly what we want. So now, if you go right into the circle, whoops, we got to look at the one we're working on. So if I go into the circle, the icon, you can see that the background changes colors, but the icon doesn't change. And the icon only changes when well, it doesn't actually change at all. So what we need to do is, instead of changing the color here, we want to say when social-icon is hovered, we want to target the SVG. Right? So when we hover over this entire div, right, not just over the icon, but the entire div, I want to change the color of just the icon. So then I can just change this to color white. All right, so now it looks like it's working exactly the way we want it to. The next thing that we need to add is the actual button so that the user can make a donation. So we're going to add this blue support button right here. And going back to the code, it's going to be just a simple button. And so outside of the social icons div, we're going to create a button. And I'm just going to give this a class of support button. And I'm just going to, it's just going to say support me. And actually, we're going to wrap this inside a div. And now back to the CSS, just so that we don't have a hideously boring button. There's going to actually be a lot of styles here. So I'm going to type them out. I would recommend just copying it from the Git repo and then just fast forwarding it. So I'm going to add some white space or set the white space to be no wrap. I'm going to set the border to be 0, the outline to be 0, the display to be block. I'm going to give it a height of 50 pixels. Let's give it a line height of 40 pixels. We'll give it a padding, so 0 and 90 pixels. And then I've got some box shadow, so I'm going to copy this line in because it's a pretty long line. And once again, just copy this from the Git repo. Color is going to be white. Now let's give it a border radius of 100 pixels. And then we're going to set the font size to be 18 pixels. Font weight is going to be set to 600. And then we're going to set the text transform to be uppercase. And then we're going to add some more letter spacing to be 0.025 EM. And let's set the background color to be that blue. So that's going to be 29ABE0. And then finally, I'm going to add some margin to the top. And then center it horizontally. And now we've got our button. Right now, there's no on-click event handler for this button just yet. We're going to come back to that in a bit. But let's move on to finishing up the bottom section. So this is the main content where I have my story, as well as, well, we'll finish up with this contribution section at the end. So we're just going to add this for now. And so here, I'm going to add a new div called main-content. And within there, I'm going to add another div called my-story. And then for the story part, this I recommend you just copying directly from the Git repo. There's no point in typing out all of that. So I'm just going to copy and paste it. It's just a couple of paragraphs. And so now if we go down here, we can see that it's there. We just got to style it now. So for main content, we're going to add a few things. First of all, we want to add some margin from the top of this to the button. I'm going to do margin dash top 10 pixels. And actually for now, I'm just going to keep it as that. For the my story, I'm going to add a box shadow again. And once again, just copy this from the Git repo. It's a pretty long line. And then let's take a look at what that looks like now. So it's starting to look okay, but you'll see that from the edges, the text is just a little too close for my liking. So I'm going to set some padding. I'm also going to set a border radius to give it a little bit of curve. And then let's set the color. This is going to be RGB of 68, 76, and 87. And let's change the font size to be 18 pixels. And then font weight to be 400. All right, and so that's exactly what I want. It's a little bit hard to see because we got white on white, but hopefully you guys can see the nice box shadow and the style that I'm trying to achieve. The next thing that we should work on is making sure that when we click this button, it opens up that modal so that the user can input his credit card details. And looking at the completed project, when you select this button, it opens up this modal right here. And the way we accomplish this is I'm using a library called React Modal just to make it simple because I'm not here to kind of explain the whole idea behind how to make a modal. I'd rather just use a library so that we can just kind of focus on making the entire project. So going back to here, we're going to use a library called React Modal. And so you can take a look at the documentation at this website. But on the front end, let's just do an npm install react-modal. And using this library is pretty easy. So if we go back to our main.jsx, first of all, let's import it. So we'll do import. And it comes with this modal component that we can use. So we just import that from react-modal. And so a couple of things that we have to configure. So within our component, let's reference that modal component. And we just have to set the root element where our app is, which is going to be that same root one that we always reference. Then the next thing is we need to set up a use state hook so that we can manage the state for when the modal is open and when the modal is closed. So let's import the use state hook. So I'm going to let VS Code import that for me. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a variable that's called show dialog. So this is going to represent, whether the dialog is open or closed. And then to modify it, we'll do set show dialog. And by default, it's going to be false. So when it's false, that means the modal is closed. When it's set to true, that means the modal is open. Then within our return statement for our component, what we can do is go under this parent div, and I can reference that modal component. And there's a few different props that we should pass. Oops. There's a few props that we should pass in. So the first thing is we have to give it the prop for letting it know, is it open or not? So here, I can just say, for now, we'll just hard code it as true. So this means that the modal is going to be open. And let me see if that'll actually work, if we could just kind of show that, what that looks like. So yeah, you can see the modal covering up the whole page right here. And if we go back and set this to false, even though it's still in there, we no longer see it. So that's how we control when the modal is open and closed. Now let's set up some functions to handle the logic of changing our state when the user closes the modal or opens the modal. So I'm going to create a function and I'm going to call this open. So this is going to handle the logic of opening our modal. And it's very simple. All we have to do is just say set show dialog. So we're referencing this function from our useState hook, and I'm going to set this to true, right? And so now what we can do is, first of all, I can change this is open to reference show dialog. So when show dialog is set to true, the modal will be open, and when the show dialog is set to false, it'll be closed. And then let's also set up a function to handle the logic for when the modal closes. So when we call this function close, we're just going to set the set show dialog to be false. And so once we set that to false, is open is going to be set to false, and the modal will be closed. Okay, and so now to actually open and close the modal, let's click on our, or let's go to our button, right? This is the button that's ultimately responsible for opening our modal. And I'm going to set an onClick property, or an onClick event handler. And I'm going to set this to open. So when the user clicks the button, it's going to trigger this function right here. And when this function runs, we set the set show dialog to true. And when that's set to true, that means show dialog is set to true, which means the modal will open. So let's take a look and see if that works. So I'm going to hit the support me button. And you can see it does open the modal. Perfect. However, there's no way to close it, and we're not actually passing it in any content. So let's go back to our app. Now, to actually handle the logic of closing the modal, we have to pass in another prop called onRequestClose. And this is just going to be, when the user, clicks outside the modal to close it, how do we actually handle that? So here we pass in the function close. And so when the user tries to click out, it's going to call this function close, which is going to set show dialog to false, and then then is open is going to be set to false, and the modal will close. So if we save that, now if I click this, it opens. Click outside of it, it closes. I wonder what happens if we click it. So we click inside of it, it's going to stay open. That's kind of how modals work. Yeah, and then we click outside of it, it's going to close. One other thing to mention, actually, there's two other things that we can add to this modal. So first of all, we should add a content label. So the content label is a string that indicates how the content container should be announced to screen readers. So this obviously isn't going to impact the way it looks. It's just for people who use screen readers. And so we can just set this equal to, I don't know, I'm just going to set it as example modal. You want to give it something descriptive like the payment modal or something like that. And the last thing that we want to do is, when we click on this, let's style our modal a little bit. I'm going to just copy and paste a few styles. And I want you to just copy this from the Git repo as well. So there's no need to just type this out one by one. And then we've got this variable custom styles where we have all of our styles. And then we can pass that as a prop as well. And so here we can pass in a style prop and then reference that custom styles variable. All right, so let's, I don't think it should change it too much. We've got this tiny little box now. Not a big deal. Once we actually add content to our modal, it'll be a little bit bigger. And so to add content to the modal, you just place it in between the opening and closing tag. So we can reference now our, our components. We want our checkout form. So that's how the user pays, and that's what we want in the modal. So I can now reference our checkout form. Save that, and let's take a look. So if we hit support me, you can see, there you go, guys. So this is our modal with our Stripe input field. And that's great. I think everything looks good so far. However, if we go and take a look at the completed project, we should also allow the user to input a contribution amount, because we don't want to hard code some value like we do on the back end. Instead, we want the user to determine how much money he wants to donate instead of giving them fixed prices. So let's tackle that next. So let's work on getting the extra input field so that we can accept a contribution amount. It's going to be fairly simple. We just add an extra input field to that checkout form. So under the checkout form component, let's go down to where we render this out. And right above the card section, first of all, we can comment out the render error message and render success message. We won't be using that. Comment that out, and then let's add an input field. Type is going to be number. And let's add a placeholder as well. We'll do placeholder equals, and we'll just say $, and then contribution amount. And with React, we want to make this a controlled input field. So we'll set up a useState hook for that as well. And this is going to represent the value of that's currently in the input field. And I'm going to call this, we'll do a const and then amount and then set amount. And we'll do useState and then just set that equal to a blank string. And then on the input field, we'll set the value equal to be amount. And then we'll set a onChange event handler to be that. And then we'll say e.target.value. Well, whoops. We want to do set amount to be e.target.value. So let's save that. And let's just make sure we got that working now. And so if I hit support me now, we can see that we have this field and I can enter in numbers and it seems to be working. So the only thing that we have to do now is let's add some classes and then just make it kind of match up with the rest of our form. And so I'm going to give this a class of checkout-form __ amount. And we'll go to app.css. Actually, before we do that, let's go back to the checkout form and I want to add one more CSS class. Actually, never mind. We'll just leave it like that. So back to the CSS file. I'm going to do .checkout-form __ amount. And we'll set the color to be 32325D. Border none. Font-family. We'll set this to be Helvetica. And then sans serif. Font size is going to be 16 pixels. Width, we'll do 100%. And line height will be 1.2 EM. And then padding is going to be 16 pixels as well. So now if we take a look, it looks pretty similar. The only weird thing is this card. The card field doesn't go all the way to the edge. I think I know what's causing that. So if we go back all the way to the top, under, let's see, where is it? Oh, sorry. It's going to be under our card css.css. So width, we can change this to, let's do 100 pixels, 100%. See what that looks like. There we go. That's what I want. So now everything matches up. Things look okay. It's not the greatest looking thing, but it's not terrible. What we can do is actually, if we go back to this checkout form, I can give this form a class of .checkout-form. And we can go back to CSS. And right above that, I can do width to be 500 pixels and margin 0 auto. Okay, so that looks good. Now, the next thing is, even though a user can, put in a specific number, when we actually send our data to the backend, we're not even sending that amount to the backend yet because we haven't configured that. And if we actually take a look at our API, the create payment intent, we hard code the value. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this and I'm going to create a new API. This one will just be, I'll just leave it in there just so that when you guys take a look at the Git repo, you can see how we originally had it. And then I'm going to create a new one. This time I'm just going to change the URL so that we know it's going to be different. And I'm going to set this to be API/v1. / create payment intent. That way we can have both. And in this case, we're no longer going to hard code the value. Instead, the front end is going to send the amount within the post request, and we can grab that from the body. So I can say const, and we can destructure out the amount from rec.body. However, for this to work, we have to use a middleware. And that's going to be right under this cores middleware, and we'll just do app.use and then express.json. And then down here, we have the amount, so we can just set this to be amount. And remember, if the key and the value are the same, then we can just remove this part. And that should be all that we need to change for the backend for now. What we can do is I think it'd be good to set up a try catch block just for good practice. So I'm going to do try catch. And we're going to move all of this to the try block. And then if we get some kind of error, I'm going to just send a res with the status of 400. And I'll just say status was fail. Okay, so that's all we need to do for the back end. So now on the front end, let's actually send the amount in our payload. So going back to our checkout form, where we go to our logic, right? So this is where we actually hit our Express backend. So first of all, we want to make sure that we update that URL because we now changed it to API v1. And so this is very easy. We only need to change it in one place, and that's because we set it up with our Stripe service where we have our base URL. So I could just say /API/v1, and that's the only place we need to change it. And then in our checkout form, when we send this post request, we're going to send some extra data. So we can pass in an object, and all we have to do is just pass in the amount. So this is referencing amount from this useState hook. Now, there's a couple things to keep in mind, and I realize we probably already broke our app. And that's because if we go back to server.js, let's test this out. But what I want to do is I just want to do a console.log of amount, and I want to show you what's going to happen. And let's go back to the other terminal. And I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. And let's just make sure we do a save all. So now if we do this, and let's just pick a contribution amount of $10. And let me get my test number. The all 4242s. We do pay now, and if we take a look, it just says 10, right? And so that's just 10. However, if you recall the way that the Stripe API works is when we set the amount, this is in the lowest denomination. And so that means that when we put it in 10, that means we're asking for 10 cents, not $10. So we have to multiply everything by 100 when we get this in our backend. And on top of that, I believe this is a string. If I do type of amount and then do the same thing again, 10. See, you can see it's a string. So an easy way to convert that to not only a number, but also get it in dollars, all we have to do is just do amount times 100. So this will convert it to a number. Whoops, actually that should be amount equals is set to amount times 100. And so that should fix our problems. Let's save that and let's test this out real quick. So I'm going to do, let's do $35. Paste that number in, do all of that. And if we check our Stripe API or our Stripe dashboard, we can see that it now charged $35. So it looks like all the changes we made are now working. It accepts the right number of dollars, and it takes it in dollars, and then it'll make sure it gets converted and sent to the Stripe API as cents. So that's why we multiply it by 100. So far right now we can accept a payment and it successfully gets processed with a certain amount. However, when we actually pay and then it finishes paying, we don't really give the user any feedback that it's completed. So let's set up some logic so that if it either succeeds or it fails, the user either gets that green check mark or they get that message saying that the payment failed. And putting these changes in place isn't going to take too much work because we've already set up a lot of the loading and error handling. We've already got the states for when we're processing, when we have an error, and when we succeed. So all we have to do is just tap into those states, and we can provide the user some sort of feedback. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up a function called render form. So this is going to actually render out the form. And I'm going to paste all of the logic that we have for our form. Well, not the logic, but our actual form components within here. So I'm going to copy this form. And you guys will see in a second why I'm doing this. And I'm just going to paste it in here. And then in the return statement, right, all we have to do is just call that render form method. And it looks like I got an error. Let's take a look. What does it say? Line 65. Or 65. Yep. And I realized I made one mistake. This needs to be a return. So we'll return that form element. Yep. And there we go. So at this point, we shouldn't have changed anything from a functionality perspective. If we still, do 15, paste our credit card number in. Well, I got to get that number again. And then do that. Nothing else should have changed. So it looks like it went through. And then if I go into my Stripe account and then refresh, I get the $15. So that looks good. So now let's move on to actually rendering out that green check mark. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up a couple of if statements. So I'm going to say here, if succeeded. So if succeed is true, which means we've successfully completed a payment. We're going to return a check mark. So we can grab a check mark from the Font Awesome library and from the React icons library that we used. And so to do that, we can just do import and then fa check circle from React -icons/fa. And now in our render form, we can say we want to return, and whoops, that should be parentheses. And I'm going to return a div. And I'm going to provide some inline styles real quick. And I'm going to say font size is going to be 128 pixels. And the color is going to be green. And then within this div, we can do fa check circle. And then outside of this if statement, we can do an else if. And we'll say this time if there's an error instead of a success, then we can return a message saying the payment failed. So we'll do return. We'll have another div again. I'm going to give this an inline style as well. And I'm just going to say font size is 64 pixels. And color is red. And we'll say payment failed, try again. And last but not least, we'll have an else statement. And I'm going to move this return statement into that else statement. Yep. So if we don't have a success or a failure, then we're just going to return the plain form. That means that the user hasn't even attempted at submitting a payment. So let's take a look and let's test that out. So going back to our React app, we'll go here. Let me get my credit card number. We'll do $12. So now we should ideally see a check mark. Yep, and there you go. So we've got the check mark, and then we can close out of it. Next thing is I notice how this button is not going all the way. So let's set the width to be 100% real quick. And that should be in our, I think, card CSS. No, it's going to be in our app CSS support button. Where'd it go? So I set where's the width on my, no, not the support button. We want donate button. The width, 100%. So now that looks better. And the next thing that we want to test is let's test a failure. So if we go to one of the failed card numbers, let's get a card declined. Do $44. And let's see what happens. Yep, and there you go. So we've got error handling all set up now, and we can now provide the user a little bit of feedback on if their card went through or not. All right, guys, so we're almost done. The last thing that we need to tackle is let's get the contributions set up so that we can display to the user how much total contributions we received. So this is going to be like one of those traditional progress bars that you see within like GoFundMe or Kickstarter or something like that. And you'll see that it's pretty easy to set up. For the contributions amount, I didn't want to make this video last too long. So I didn't want to set up like a Mongo database or like a SQL or a Postgres database to store the contributions. So what we're going to do is we're going to use a very simple solution. We're just going to store how many contributions we've received within a JSON file, right? So we'll just store it as a number. When our Express server boots up, it'll load the data from the Express server, which is the number of contributions. And then every time someone makes a payment, we'll just update that value. Very simple solution. I don't really want to make this video take much longer than it already has. So that's why I'm going to use that method. So let's move to our backend, and in our server directory, let's create a file. And I'm going to create this file, contributions.json. So this is going to contain the total number of dollars that have been contributed to my cause. And all we have to do is just going to store one value, and I guess we can just call this contributions as well. And then this is going to represent how many dollars have been contributed. So we'll start off with 0. And so now on our server side, what we want to do is we want to, upon boot up, load up the value within this JSON file. So we're going to need access to the FS module. And this is what's going to allow us to read and write to a file. So we'll do const fs equals require fs. And then after we load up Stripe right here, before we have all of our API endpoints, let's define a variable. I'm just going to call this contributions, and we're not going to set it to a value just yet. And so now I'm going to create a function that's going to retrieve the data from that JSON file. And I'm going to call it fetch contributions. So we'll do const fetch contributions equals async. There's going to be an asynchronous function. And now within here, let's do a try catch block. Now to read from a file, we can tap into the FS module, and we do .promises, and then we do read file. And then we pass in the location of the file. So it's going to be in the same directory, so we can just do contributions.json. And we're going to set the value of this to be raw data. And this is going to be an asynchronous function, so let's do the await syntax. And then after we receive the raw data, we have to parse it. So we'll do contributions, or we can do json.parse raw data. And we want to set this equal to this variable right here. So we'll do contributions equals json dot parse raw data. And then, if there's an error, we can just console.log it for now. And then outside of our function, we have to actually call it so it runs. So we'll do fetch contributions. And let's test to see if this works. So what I'm going to do is down here, I'm going to do a console.log contributions, and then we'll print out the value of contributions. So let's save that. Okay, I'm going to move this up here. And let's try it now. There we go. So here, yeah, we can see we've got contributions and it's set to this right here. So this object, so we would need to tap into the contributions property to get that value. All right, so now that we have access to that data, let's set up an endpoint on here, a route, so that the front end can retrieve how many contributions we have. And so what I'm going to do is let's go down here to the bottom, and I'm going to do app.get. So this is going to be for a GET request. And if the front end sends a request to API v1 contributions, we're going to just return how many contributions we have so far. And this is easy. We can just do res.status 200 .json. And we want to tap into that contributions. Well, we want to send a contributions and then tap into that contributions variable. And we want the contributions property to actually get the value. So we do contributions.contributions. Probably should have named it something different to make it a little easier, but I think it makes sense. All right, so now that we can retrieve that data, let's finish off the rest of the UI. So let's build this card right here. And so going back to our code, let's go to our front end. And what I actually want to do is I want to create a new component that's going to represent everything that's stored right here under the contributions. And I'm just going to call it contributions.jsx. So we'll do new file under components. We'll do contribution.jsx. And this is going to be a functional component as well. And for the parent div that's going to return, that's going to wrap everything within this component, I'm going to give this a class of contributions. And then within here, I'm going to create a new div. I'm going to call this contributions __ message. And then we'll put a p tag and we'll just say help and sobriety once and for all. And then another p tag, all livers matter. Then below this div, we'll create a new div called contribution stats, or with a class of contribution stats. And right now we'll put a p tag, and then within this p tag we'll have a span. And within the span, actually the span's going to have a class. I'm going to call this contributions __ made. And for now, I'm just going to hard code some value. So let's say like 100. Then we made $100. And then outside of the span, but still in the p tag, we'll set raised of our 1, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So 1,000,000 goal. Then outside of this div, we're going to set up the progress bar now. Actually, for now, let's just take a look and see what this looks like. And we don't see anything. That's just because we have to load up the contributions component. And so within our main page, right down here with 2 divs below it. So right here, let's import our contributions component. Okay, and we can see all of that data down here. And so outside of this div, we're going to create a new div called contributions underscore progress dash bar. Then we'll have another div called contributions underscore progress. And then finally, outside of that, we're going to have another div to hold the monkey image. And this is going to be, this is going to have a class of contributions underscore image. And let's import that monkey image. So we can do import monkey from assets, and then we can grab monkey.jpg. And then we can just pass in a image with a source of monkey. All right, so let's take a look, and things are looking good. And so let's add some styles now. So we're going to go to our app.css. And at the bottom, we'll target the contributions class. We're going to add a box shadow, and I'm just going to copy this. And we're going to give it the same padding that basically we're going to take the CSS and match it with what we have right here. So we're going to get that box shadow. We're going to add some padding. And so 16 pixels. We're going to give it a border radius of 8. And for color, I'm going to do RGB 68, 76, 87. We can set the font size. It's going to be 18 pixels. Font weight is going to be 400. And we're going to leave it at that for now. We'll come back. We're going to probably add some more CSS to that. But let's now target the contributions underscore message. And we're going to set the font weight to be bold. And we're going to set the font size to be 24 pixels. And then margin bottom to be 20 pixels. So let's see what that looks like. All right, so that's looking good. So now let's style, how many contributions we've gotten so far. So I'm going to do contributions underscore made. And we're going to set the font weight to bold. And we're going to set the font size to be 32 pixels. And then the color, it's going to be that same green color that we've kind of been using, I think. So 42D6AA. And there you go. So we've got $100 raised of. Let's put a little space between these two. So if we go back to contributions, I think we just put it right here. Yeah, so we've got some space. All right, so now we need to actually do the progress bar. So the way that it works is we're going to have a div that goes, across our container essentially, and then it's going to have this gray color, and then we're going to put another div within it that's going to take the same exact height, and then the width of the inner div is going to be based off of how much money we've made. So if we've made $500,000, so half of our goal, I'm going to set the width to 50%. If we made 250,000, I'm going to set the width to 25%. So by adjusting the width, we can kind of make it look like we're making progress in our little, I don't know what you call a progress bar. So let's style our progress bars. I'm going to go to app.css, and we can grab .contributions underscore progress dash bar. So this is going to be the gray bar, so it's going to take a width of 100%. We're going to give it a height of 20 pixels so that we can actually see it. Background color, this is going to be that gray color, so we're going to do C4 38. Border radius 10 pixels, and then margin dash bottom 30 pixels. So now we've got the bar. It's going across the whole screen. We'll fix that in a bit. Then for the actual bar to determine, how much progress we've made, we're going to tap into the contributions _ progress class. And we're going to set the background color to be that green color. We're going to set height to be 20 pixels and border radius to be 10 pixels. And, we won't see anything now, but if I grab this and set the width to be, 15%, well, that didn't work. And I see I have a typo, so contributions. And so, yeah, when I set it to 15%, it's going to take up 15%. If I set this to 55%, it's going to take up half, roughly half. So you can see that's how we kind of control the progress bar, is by basically just setting the width to a certain percentage. It's going to be a percentage based off of $1 million, which is our goal. So for now, I'm just going to leave this off because we're going to hard code that in our checkout form. Well, not hard coded, but we're going to calculate that value and set it with an inline style. But before we move any further, let's finish up the styling. We're almost done. I just want to style the image real quick. So we'll do contributions _ image img, and we're going to set the width to be 100%. Okay. And now things are looking good. And what I want to do is, first of all, I want to make these side by side. And so, if we take a look at how we've got this set up, we want to go to main content, and I'm going to make this a grid container, and then we can put them side by side once they're in a grid container. So if we go back up to main content, we can do a display of grid, and then we can do grid template columns, and we can do 3fr to 2fr. And so this is going to make the my story to be a little bit bigger. So 3 out of 5 versus 2 out of 5. So the contribution section is going to be just a little bit smaller, which is what I want. Then we can do grid -template -rows. This is going to be min max. I'm going to set this to be min -content, and then this is going to be set to auto. And then finally, we're going to put we're going to add a gap, because right now they're lined up right against one another. So I want to put a little bit of gap, and I'll say grid -gap 20 pixels. All right, so let's take a look. Let's see how good that looks. And it looks pretty close. Actually, it's exactly the same. So now let's actually set up the logic for fetching how many contributions have been made. Now, to fetch the contributions amount from our Express server, I'm going to make use of the context API. So we're going to use the context API to not only fetch the data, but store the data. And so what I'm going to do is under our source directory, let's create a new folder. This is going to contain all of our contexts. I'm just going to call this context, and then let's create one file within there. And I'm just going to call this contribution context.js. And so within this file, we want to import React. And we also want to import a few other things. So we'll also import useState as well as create context. And so let's create our context. And so I'm going to do export const contributions context, and set that equal to create context. And then we also want to create our contribution context provider. So we'll do export and then const contributions context provider. And make sure we pass in our props. And we will return our contributions context.provider. And remember, we want to render out our props, our child props. So since our context is going to be fetching our data, let's import our Stripe service. So we'll do import Stripe service. And I'm going to define a function called fetch contributions. So we'll do const fetch contributions. It's going to be an asynchronous function. And let's set up the logic for actually fetching that data now. And we want to set up a couple of useState hooks. So one is going to actually store the contributions value, and the other one's going to manage the loading state if we want that. So we'll do const contributions and set contributions. And we'll set that equal to useState. By default, we're just going to set it to 0. And then let's set up another one for loading. And by default, that's going to be false. So in our try catch block, the first thing we want to do is we want to set the loading state to be true. Then we'll do const results. We're going to fetch our data. We'll do Stripe service dot get, and then we're going to hit the contributions endpoint. So let's see what that is. So that's going to be API v1 contributions. So we can just do / contributions. And then we want to store this data within contributions. So we can do set contributions. And we want results. And remember, it's always going to be in that data property. And then it's going to be contributions. That's going to store the total amount of contributions into this variable right here. And then after all of that, we can set loading to false. And lastly, we need to pass this down. So we'll do value equals fetch contributions. So we want to have access to that. We want contributions. We want loading. And we want set contributions. So we're going to give them access to pretty much everything. So if we want to tap into, if we want to go to fetch the contributions, get the contributions, set the contributions as well, we can do all of that. We won't need all of them, but I'm just going to go ahead and pass those down. Then we have to get our context provider and wrap our app.jsx. So I'm going to grab this, and we want contributions context provider. And I'm going to let VS Code import it, so it automatically imported it. And then we want to take this, and we want to wrap that last div, and then we can save that. And so now all of our components will be able to either fetch the contributions or modify them. And so what I want to do is under our contributions component, actually, the first thing that we need to do is fetch the contributions. So I think it makes sense, since the contributions component is what's going to display that value, it's going to be responsible for fetching it. So let's set up a useState hook. So that means we can basically tell when this component first mounts, I want to immediately fetch this data from our backend server. And so to do that, we have to import the useState hook, or sorry, not useState, useEffect. So we'll let VS Code import that. And we have to pass in an arrow function. And let's also import our context. So we have to import useContext. And we also have to import our contributions context. And we want just the context, not the provider in this case. And we're going to set that equal to, and we'll do const, and then we'll destructure out everything we need. So we need fetch contributions. We'll destructure out contributions. We'll destructure out loading, and I think that's all we'll need here. And so now in our useEffect hook, we'll just call fetch contributions. And that's all we need to do. And when you want this hook to only run when the component first mounts, all we have to do is just pass in an empty dependency array. All right, so now when this component mounts, it's going to fetch the data and it's going to store it within contributions. So instead of us hard coding this value right here, we can tap into the contributions value. So I'm going to do $, and then we'll do contributions. All right, so let's save that and let's take a look. And right now it looks like it's broken because we should see $0. It's reporting nothing. And we could just kind of quickly take a look. So if we inspect it, we can check a few things and let's take a look at and so we can inspect it and just kind of see what might be causing this issue. Okay, guys, so I made a couple of typos on the server.js. I misspelled contributions twice here. So I just corrected that, and that seems to have fixed the issue. After I saved that, we can see it's rendering out the contributions value to be $0. Now, this is great. The next thing that we have to do is that when the user submits a payment, right, and we get back a confirmation from the Stripe API, we need to then send a message to our backend server to update the total contributions value because the Stripe API isn't going to tell us that. We have to tell our backend server, listen, we just successfully completed a $10 payment. I want to add $10 to the contributions. So we need to set up a new route for our backend server. And this is going to be a post route. But it's going to go to the same URL. So it's going to be app.post. And it's going to be /API/v1/contributions. First thing that we need is a try-catch block. And what we're going to do is we're going to grab basically the front end is going to send a post request, and it's going to send a post request with the total amount of dollars we're supposed to add to our contributions. And so we'll be able to get that amount from rec.body.amount. Now this is going to come in as a string, so we want to convert it to an int. And so what we'll do is we'll say we want contributions, right, which is this variable right here, which is going to hold that value. And we want to tap into the contributions property, and we want to do plus equals rec.body.amount. However, this is a string, so we can do a parse int, which will convert it to an int. And so after we add that, we need to then write this data back into the file. So we're just right now changing the variable, but we have to update the contributions.json file with the new value after we added it. And so what we will do is make use of the fs library again. So we'll do fs.promises. This time we'll use the write file. And we're going to write it to contributions.json. And what we're going to pass in is basically the value of contributions, but we have to convert it to JSON. And so the way to do that is by doing json.stringify and then wrap that in parentheses. That'll allow us to write it into a JSON file. And this is asynchronous. So we're going to do await, and this is going to be async. And on top of that, after we write to the file, we want to send a new response or send back a response to the front end saying that, everything was successful in updating the API, and we're going to send them the new value of contributions. So we'll do contributions.contributions. And if this fails, then we'll send a res.status400.json, and we'll just say status fail. And so now moving back to the checkout form, let's take a look at how we actually handle the payment. And so if we go to the logic under our handle submit, so what we're going to do is we're going to send a response to our backend server to create payment intent. Then we're going to send a confirm card payment, and then we have some checking to see if there was an error or if it was successful. So if there's an error, we don't need to update the contribution amount because we didn't successfully complete the payment. However, if we successfully did complete the payment, then what we want to do is send another API request to that contributions API. And so here, when it's successful, we'll say const new contributions, because remember our backend's going to tell us what the total amount of contributions is at this point. And we can say await, and we want to call Stripe service.post, and the URL is going to be API. It's going to be /contributions, and we want to pass in the amount. Okay, and so that'll hit our backend server. So we'll send the amount that we want to add. It's going to write it to the file, and then it's going to give us back what the new total amount of contributions are. And so from there, since we have the new contributions amount within new contributions, we can set contributions. So we can set the new value in the front end, and then we can just set that to new contributions dot contributions. Actually, it's going to be .data .contributions. And so when we update this value, then we should automatically update this immediately as well as the progress bar. And I realized I forgot to import. So we don't have access to set contributions yet because that's part of the context. So we need to set up our context hook. So we'll do use context. We'll import that. And then we'll import our contribution context. And we'll set that equal to const and then destructure out set contributions. And I just made a mistake again. This should not be within the hook. This should be at the top. And before we proceed any further, let's update this real quick so that the bar, the width style gets placed appropriately depending on how many contributions we have. And so that's going to be within the contributions.jsx. And if we go to the contributions progress, we can set the style property on that. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say style equals, and then we want to set the width, and that's going to be contributions. We're going to set it equal to contributions. Okay, first of all, we want template literal, and then we want to set this to contributions divided by 1 million. And we're going to wrap that in parentheses. So we're just trying to grab a percentage right now. And then to make this a percentage, we're going to multiply it by 100. Okay, and it goes away as it should. However, if we go back to our contributions.json and just manually set this to be, let's say 150,000, save that, and we'll refresh the page. Looks like we ran into an issue. So let's take a look. Why is this not updating? Let's see what the width is set to. Width is, okay, so it somehow calculated 0. What was my math? Let's take a look. And I think I need to do percent. That's what I messed up. There we go. So now it shows the percentage. So it looks like it's working. Let's go back to this contributions.json. Let's set this back down to 0. And let's try to make a purchase. And let's refresh the page as well. And let's see if everything works. So we'll do this. Contribution amount, let's add $1,000. And let's do a pay now. And it looks like it worked. So this got updated. However, I did notice an odd behavior. So I'm going to make this a little smaller, and I want to see if I'm seeing the same thing right now. So let's put in 5,000. Put the card number. And then let's do a pay now. And you'll notice how this thing actually reloads. So Nodemon's actually reloading the application. And that's because, remember, Nodemon looks to see if you make any changes to any of your files. So if we make a change to server.js, it's going to reload the application. And the problem is, since we're writing to a JSON file, it ends up reloading anytime we make changes, which is probably not what we want. So just from a development perspective, there's ways around this. And what we can do is, instead of just doing Nodemon, we can say Nodemon. Well, actually, what we can do is we would have to go to our package.json, and we could say Nodemon --ignore. And then we set this to be contributions.json so that it ignores that file. And it looks like we have to escape these quotations because we have quotations within quotations. So let's escape out of that. And I think that should work. So let's do an npm start and let's see if that works. So now if we do a payment, and let's just do another $1,000. And let's do a pay now. Let's make sure to see that we don't actually update. And there we go. So when we ignore contributions.json, that's going to make sure that our server, or Nodemon specifically, doesn't restart our application because it's ignoring this file now. And I can't remember, did this go up? Let's do it one more time. I'm going to do 50,000. So let's do 100,000. And let's make sure the progress bar increases. And it looks like it does. So everything's working. The only other thing that maybe we need to address is, let's say we change this, the contributions.json back down to 0. And let's restart our application, our backend. And you'll see that we don't have anything right now. So maybe you want a little bit of bar at the beginning just to make it look like, just to show the user what it's supposed to look like. What we can do is just always have it default to be, like 1% or something, because not only is it going to be 0 or not show you anything right now, what happens is if we contribute just, like let's say $2, and we do $2, it's still not going to show anything because 2 divided by 1,000,000, and then I guess it's just going to round down. So what we can do is on the contribution.json, we can set a ceiling, or we can basically round up. So as soon as we get to $1, it's going to always at least round up to 1%. We can do math.ceil, and then we can, I think, wrap it all the way past the 100. So then save. And so now you can see that no matter how little money we send, we'll always get at least 1%. So that way, if a user donates some money, we can see that the donation actually went through from our progress bar. Anyways, guys, so that's it. That's the entire project. You'll see that it's also mobile responsive. Well, I thought it was. Oh, we didn't actually finish the mobile responsive part. So let me add the one media query that we need to actually do that. It's really simple. And if we go to app.css, we can do @media, and it's going to be max-width 800 pixels. We're going to say the main content, which is the wrapper that wraps both of these blocks. We're going to set the grid-template-columns to be 1fr. So there's only going to be one column. And so now, you can see once we get to a small enough value, we've got one column. The only thing that I don't like is that when we go into our mobile view, this part is at the bottom. I'd rather have the contributions at the top. So we can tap into the order property. So if I do .contributions, I can set order to be -1. And I'm also going to give it some margin at the top. All right, and so there we go. So full screen, looks good, looks good. And then once we get to mobile view, it looks pretty good. Yep. And so that's it, guys. So hopefully you enjoyed this project. You can see that integrating Stripe is pretty easy. I guess, actually, let me say one more thing. When you go to the dashboard, right now we're in development mode. So if you go back to our home, where is it? We're using our test API keys. You need to, when you actually go to deploy this in production, you have to activate your Stripe account. And only once you do your Stripe account, activate your Stripe account, will you have access to your live keys. So when you actually want to handle payments and not just, practice with like a dummy account, you have to activate your account, and then they'll give you a new publishable key and a new secret key. And so when you deploy it, make sure you update your code so that it makes use of the new publishable and the new secret keys that are associated with your live API keys. But they're going to look exactly the same. They're just going to have a different value. And so that's something to just keep in mind. Also, when you're in production mode, you can't use these test cards, which is kind of unfortunate because I actually tried deploying this. And when I deployed it, I wanted to find a way to actually test to see if I maybe messed up some environment variables or things like that. And I couldn't because, when you're in production and you're using the live keys, you can't use these test cards. So the only way I was able to test it was donating my own actual money, which just came back to me. But then Stripe takes like their 1% or whatever. So it is what it is. It's just something to keep in mind.